Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. If you're searching for an incredible novel, check out my Patreon page. Your support will help transform this story into an exciting audiobook. Join me on this adventure. By becoming a Patreon member, you'll be helping me keep creating and bringing this content to life. Thank you for being part of the journey.
Chapter 41. Coward. You'd have to thank Hela, Mistress Earth, I said with a small smile. She was the one who beat some sense into him. I just watched. But did you step in to help her? Gaia asked. I shook my head. Nope, I chuckled. Knowing him, he needed to be beaten senseless in order for him to have sense. Then I should be thanking you as well, my little student, Gaia said with a small smile. Are you going to thank Hela? I asked. Gaia looked at Hela with a curious look. The Asgardian princess crossed her arms and gave her a look of indifference. Thank you, dear, she said with a brilliant smile. Hela scoffed. You can thank me by spending some time with Thor. I am afraid I can't do that. Gaia smiled sadly. Pussy. I choked on my spit, as an indignant look formed on Gaia's face. Excuse me. A Midgardian term for coward. Hela smirked. I picked up a few things from my stay here in Midgard. Gaia raised an eyebrow at her. I know what the term, pussy, means, dear, she said, rolling her eyes. I assure you I am no coward. Her lips quirked upwards, forming a small smirk. But you do know that the term pussy actually mean a female's vagina, right? I know, Hela growled. If this is going where I think this is going, then you better silence yourself this instant. I don't take orders from you, dear, Gaia grins, unless dash. Gaia, please. I sighed, and Hela, while she may not act like who she is most of the time, she still is my teacher, and I respect her for all of the things we have been through together. I did save your life multiple times. Gaia agreed. Remember the time when? Let's not talk about those times, I said. It wasn't pleasant. I shuddered, remembering the incident when I was about 4. I don't want to describe it, but I was careless with my knowledge of different fiction. I fucked up, bad. And as it turned out, Gaia had her eye on me ever since I had landed on this planet. Hela gave a slow nod, and remained silent. She still gave a deadly glare to Hela with her eyes never blinking once. Hela is a scary woman. Gaia glanced to the left, to the place Thor was at. Even though Thor was in the living room, with a couple of walls, Gaia could see him like it was never there. She gave off a small sigh before she turned her attention back to me. Now, back to the topic at hand, she said. I don't think Thor is ready to meet me yet. I frowned. I see your point. I do not. Hela frowned. Why would you not think Thor wouldn't want to see you? I mean, yes, he might be pissed off at you, but he already knows his life is a lie. She is talking about Thor's mental state, Hela, I interjected. I know for a fact that Thor is not going to take this well, besides the fact that she did basically abandon him. If she hadn't, this whole thing could have been avoided. I doubt that. Hela scoffed. Thor would most likely be more of a brainless idiot if he was raised by this whore. Okay, I take offense to that, Gaia said, frowning before she glanced at me. You know that I didn't intend to abandon him. I know you can't move outside of your own planet as you are its spirit, I said with a nod. I know you didn't have a choice. But what you don't understand is that you and Odin could have made arrangements, and instead of me beating some sense into your son, it could be you. Loki. Thor's voice seemed to echo throughout the walls of this room, everyone's eyebrow raised in surprise. I sighed. So, it's about that time, huh? I'm going to go down, Gaia. I saw that she was straining herself, as she was clenching her fist. She looked confused, and somewhat worried. Gaia? Something's wrong, Gaia muttered. She tried it again and again. Before, she closed her eyes, searching to find the problem. Once she did, her eyes snapped open and locked onto mine. What did you do? Gaia growled, her eyes glowing viciously. I restricted your powers for a little while, I said, not intimidate in the slightest. Now you won't vanish when the moment calls on you. I scratched the back of my head, and though while I agree with the part with Thor and his mindset being shit, I sighed. He is bound to find out eventually. You might as well tell him. It would be best if you were able to tell him on your own terms. Gaia's gaze turned thoughtful, before she eventually nodded her head in agreement. After everything that has happened, I will have to agree with you. He will most likely find out, either by life, she paused for a moment, or by Odin fucking things up. Hela snorted. He tends to do that. Gaia smirked. I can believe that. I closed my eyes and chuckled. Come on, I said. Let's not keep them waiting. I started to walk out of the room. Hela followed after me, with Gaia hesitating for a long moment, before she too began to follow me. Chapter 42. Loki. With the kids and Thor was drinking an entire liquid drink in one gulp. This drink, I like it, he smirked, raising his hand up. Another, whoa there Goldilocks. Jine grinned nervously, as she instinctively caught Thor's wrist with the elbow. Thor looked on in surprise. What seems to be the matter? He asked. Although it might be tradition, on Asgard, a lot of people would be angry that you suddenly break a glass on the floor. Gohan explained, glasses cost money, and although we may have lots of it, others do not. I see. Thor said, so your father is a wealthy man. Of course he is. Jine said proudly, he is the father of anime after all. He created shows like Naruto, One Piece, and one of my favorite shows, Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider is not better than Naruto. Gohan snorted, causing Jine to glare at him. Blasphemy. Just Saiyan. Gohan shrugged. Didn't Uncle Jason play Tommy in Power Rangers? Tina asked. Jine's eyes widened. Oh yeah. She looked away with a faraway look. He's doing, and still is doing a really good job in it. I personally am a fan of One Punch Man. Zellera stated, crossing his arms. I think his blank expression is funny, but his bald head kind of enhances his features to make him look slightly more attractive. At least to me. Saritama is more Saiyan-like than any other anime characters. Tina said softly. I mean, all he wants is a good fight, right? That's what we all want. What is this Saiyan? Thor asked curiously. A Saiyan is a race that resides on the planet Vegeta, at least according to our father. Zellera explained flatly. Basically the strongest warrior race in existence. Thor laughed. Strongest warrior race in existence? Ha! I'd like to think what my father might attest to that. Nah, Jine giggles hysterically. Father stomps all the way. There is no way that old fart stands a chance against him. Thor gave a glare. I understand you worship your father, and I admire it, but you know nothing of my father, and how strong he became during the years since Hela had been sealed. Grandpa is an old man. Zellera replied flatly. He maybe had gotten stronger, but when he gotten old, he had gotten weaker. Meanwhile, our mother was stronger than Grandpa when she was sealed away, Tina added. When she regained her full strength she was dominated by my dad. That was 8 years ago. They both are much stronger than they had ever been. Thor frowned. It was hard to believe, but after thinking about it, his sister seemed to know everything there is to know about him. And she didn't seem afraid when she told him she was going against him. Not in the slightest. And now, after hearing the children's reasoning, he considered it. Although he disagreed, he had an opened mind to the possibility. Oh, and you can come out now, Gohan said, startling Thor. No use hiding, I sensed you the moment you appeared. Thor looked at where Gohan, such a strange name, was looking at. Thor followed his gaze and saw nothing? I do not understand, Thor muttered. I do not see anything. The air shimmered, before it revealed a figure. A familiar figure. Thor's eyes lit up as he recognized who it is. Loki. Loki nodded his head, before he gazed curiously at the young mortals. He made sure he was not to be spotted until they were gone, and yet they spotted him so easily. Thor got up from his seat, and tried to hug him, but he only went through him. I am sorry, but I am not really here. Loki said, I come bearing unfortunate news. Thor sat on in attention, with the rest looking on curiously. Father is dead, he said solemnly, and although Thor believed it, the children did not. They could tell he was lying a mile away. Then why can I sense his life force? A voice said, startling the group. Everyone turned to see Hela, me, and a very beautiful woman that sort of resembles Thor in looks. Loki raised an eyebrow. This is the second time he was caught off guard. Perhaps he was losing his touch. Though he did notice 2 of them had crowns. So he was in the presence of Midgardian royalty? How interesting. Thor, who are these mortals? Loki asked Thor, curious to know. That is our half-sister. Thor said, from what I have learned, Father had been keeping many secrets from us. You've just learned about Father keeping secrets? Loki laughed harshly. I had always had my suspicions, and as it turns out I was right. He flicks his wrists and blue streaks started to appear on his body. His eyes turned blood red as horns appeared onto his head. As it turns out, I am also a well-kept secret, he sneers. What do you think of me now, brother? Loki's sneer grew. I'm sorry, brother. I didn't quite catch that. I don't care. Thor growled, his fist slamming against the floor. Loki flinched back, not expecting this. We were raised together, we fought together, we lived together. What you are, it does not matter to me. You are my brother. Gaia gulped and took a step back, as she was nervous. Normally she wouldn't care, but her time with her student was precious. It changed her view on things. Now, she was nervous, not only for her son, but for rejection. Obviously both Hela and I noticed this. I put a hand on her shoulder for comfort, while Hela crossed her arms, an indifferent look on her face, but in her eyes you could see a tiny look of pity. I sighed. Our family has so much drama it's ridiculous. I married Hela, so it was bound to come. Do I regret it? Not in the slightest. I love Hela. I love her so much, so whatever drama or conflict she gets herself into, rest assured, she would never be alone, for I would be right next to her, every step of the way. Chapter 43. Reunion between Earth and Thunder. Excellent sentiment, little brother. Hela spoke with a smirk, but you do not have to care for him, if you choose not to, considering all of the stuff that he has done to you over the years. Thor's eyes narrowed. He noticed the smirk. It reminded him of Loki's, only more cruel and evil. Oh? And you are the supposed sister Thor mentioned? Loki sneered. You look like nothing but an average mortal to me. Hela didn't even acknowledge him, causing his eyebrow to twitch. You dare ignore me, bastard child. Sneakily he raised his blades from underneath his sleeves and shot one at Hela. The blades shattered upon impact. How did this happen, when he was but on image? Well, he wasn't called the god of magic for nothing. Loki had his own tricks up his sleeves. But this caught him off guard. Loki took a step back in surprise and slight fear. Even Thor was surprised at this, but then he remembered the words of his niece. It was like a little sting or a tickle. It didn't even faze her. To her, Loki wasn't her sibling, he was just a tool that Odin used to keep the peace. How well that turned out. Loki was trying to get at something that wasn't his to begin with, longing for something that wasn't his own. Though she supposed most of what he is also father's doing, she still doesn't think any other way. Hela raised her hand on Gaia's shoulder much to her surprise, and pushed her violently in front of Thor. I am not going to introduce you to him, she said slowly, but you will not coward out of this like most of the things you do. You will own up to your mistakes, and you will be with my brother from now on. Did Hela know Gaia was a billion years older than her? Yes, she did. Did she care? No, she didn't. Gaia swallowed. Loki's eyebrow twitched. Was he being ignored? By a bastard child and two foolish mortals nonetheless? How dare they? He was technically king of Asgard now, so they should give him the respect that he deserves. Thor was too busy staring at the woman with curiosity, but he could tell. With the presence and the air that filled the room, she was important to his sister and his sister's family. Unknown to him, Hela doesn't really care about her. She is just doing this for her brother's sake. To me, she is my teacher, and to my children she is their aunt. Although they were happy to see her, they were very smart, and they figured out instantly how to read my mind. They got it from their grandfather. Bardock was a brilliant scientist after all. Just kidding, that was a joke. But, in all seriousness, people don't understand that Saiyan's are extremely smart, probably one of the smartest races in the entire universe. But they only use their brains for fighting and eating. I don't know if it is because of that, or because I am a reincarnated person that they inherited my wisdom and intelligence and is maturing faster than normal. Pretty cool because I didn't read or see it anywhere, so it was a unique change. But still scary, and wait, I do remember reading it in Marvel's The Spider fanfic, where the child had an accelerated growth. So, yeah, they know how to read moments like these, and the children remained silent, though they did look on in curiosity, and found it hilarious at how Uncle Loki's presence was easily ignored and his attempts to force Hela to acknowledge him failed miserably. Who are you? Thor tilted his head curiously. And why do you feel familiar? Gaia swallowed. I am Gaia, the spirit of the earth. There was a pause, before she steeled herself and spoke out to him in but a whisper. I am your mother. Silence. A moment of stunned silence passed between the two brothers, as Thor and Loki gaped at her with open mouths. Before. A moment passed, followed by another, and a smile broke down on Loki's face. The smile was so wide that it almost split his face, before his composure broke and he fell down to the floor laughing his ass off. Hela was tired of this, as she finally acknowledged him, but it wasn't as a king, it was as an annoying pest. She glanced at me, I nodded my head, before I raised my hand glowing with orange light, before it transferred over to Loki. Loki suddenly stopped laughing as his visage distorted in the air. You dare dash, was all he said, before he was gone. I liked Loki's character, and I thought he was dealt horribly by Odin, but he was ruining the moment between my mistress and her son, so I got rid of him. At least for the moment. You? Impossible. My mother is Frigga. Thor stammered. He took a step back and too shocked to speak coherent sentences. It is indeed true, Thor. That is why you are stronger than most. Gaia said. Solemnly. Where were you then? Thor said softly. All of those years when I was being raised and taught by my mother and the ALL father, all of my battles. All of who I was raised to be. He looked at her in the eyes. Where were you? Gaia flinched and took a step back. She bowed her head in shame. I was the spirit of earth. I had my duties. She ignored the looks I and Hela were giving her, but she did put her head down in shame. I have been a bad mother, and have no excuses for my actions, Thor. Why? He said slowly, why after all of this time, do you decide to show up now? Is it because I am most vulnerable, that you do not meet me at my full strength? No, not at all. Gaia shook her head frantically. She glanced at me. Before she glanced back at Thor, this mortal is my student. He changed me. I see now the mistakes that I made. There was another pause, as she swallowed again before she continued. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth, and that, not only am I sorry, I am proud of you. Chapter 44. I am. And they all hugged it out and forgave each other. Yeah, I wish it was that easy. Thor clenched his fist so tight he began to draw blood. At first I thought he was going to beat the shit out Gaia, or try to. That would be uncharacteristic for Thor to do, but I wasn't going to judge. If I found out my mother was some kind of deity that just straight up abandoned me, I would punch her in the face too. Then figure out why she abandoned me before deciding whether or not I forgive her or not. What happened next was probably the most maturest way I'd ever expect out of Thor. Thor stared at her for a couple of moments. A couple of long moments. Each moment was like an eternity, as we all waited with high interest to what Thor would do to her. Eventually, Thor broke the silence. He got up slowly, his eyes never left Gaia's form. He took a step, fists clenching even tighter. Before he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and walked away. Did not see that coming. Tina whispered. Yeah, I thought for sure Goldilocks would attack Aunt Gaia. Jine agreed. I saw blood on his palms. That's how angry he was. His control was surprisingly impressive. Gohan nodded his head. Much better than Uncle Loki, that's for sure. Yeah, but he's a loser. Jine. What? I'm just saying how it is. Jine shrugged. I mean, look at what he tried to do to Mom, all because Noon was paying attention to him. With me, Hela and Gaia. I expected him to beat the shit out of you. Hela replied bluntly to Gaia as her shoulders slumped in defeat. Well, I tried. She muttered depressed. I don't think anything would change his mind now. I put my hand on Gaia's shoulder again, and squeezed it gently. She didn't bother to look up to me, she just looked to the ground in shame, her eyes watering slightly. He's not lost yet. I said softly. I'm going to go talk to him. I found Thor, sitting down, panting heavily, his fists bloodied. I assumed he had been punching the ground to a point where it had been bloodied. Without any second passing by, my fingers lit up with a small orange glow before it transferred over to Thor. Thor was too busy in his own thoughts to pay attention to what was happening. Thor, son of Ben. He spoke. Your presence is not needed as of now. His voice cracked, and I could tell he was full of emotions. I thought you could use the company, I said with a small smile as slowly I sat down next to him. What ails you, God of Thunder? That title means nothing to me anymore. Thor growls. Just another one of my father's lies. Lies that he made to cover up his own mistakes? I asked. Thor closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Asgard. Everything that I had ever been taught has been a lie, and now, my own being, how I came to be. I do not even know. I am lost, Kakarot, I am confused, and most of all, I am wearied. He took a deep breath. I do not know what to feel anymore. I do not know what to tell you, Thor. I said with a sigh. I can only go off of what my wife has been through, but she had me. I looked up with a faraway look on my face. Try to move on. I said. Do what you want with who you are. Thor frowned deeper. I do not understand. No one ever chooses to be what we are, but we make the most of it. I said with a faraway look in my eyes. I never chose to be this, to be what I am. However, I made the most of it, and look where it got me. Did your father ever lie to you like mine did to me? My father is no longer in the realm of the living. I replied with my head bowed in respect as I remembered what happened. I see. Thor bowed his head in respect as well. I am sorry. You didn't know. I replied with a sad smile. My point that I am trying to make is that we can't change what made us. The past that happened had already happened. The present is now, Thor. I said. Do you remember what I said before? Thor closed his eyes and frowned. Flashback. I am confused. Thor sighed. Everything I had ever known had been a lie, and for the first time in my life, I know not of what to do. At least you admitted it. I closed my eyes. That's the first step to finding your place in this universe. I opened my eyes. The rest is up for you to decide. The past doesn't matter. Who lied to you doesn't matter. It's how you respond to it that matters. Who are you, Thor? Are you an image of the past? Forged from the flames your father created? I stared where Hela was with a smile. Take this from me personally. The past doesn't have to be who you are. Rather, it's who you choose to be now that defines you. Flashback end. Thor opens his eyes and a new light appeared in them. I understand now. He muttered. He looked directly into my eyes. Son of Ben. It is not my past that makes me who I am now, but rather who I choose to be. I nodded to him as he said these words. My smile grew larger. So, I said, who are you? Thor closed his eyes, remembering everything he had ever done, and everything he had been through, what he had learned. He accepted all of it. It was also at that moment, Hela felt the hammer vibrate slightly. She didn't pay much attention to it. Thor opened his eyes. I noticed they weren't lost anymore. Instead they had a look of pure determination on his face. Could have sworn I saw lightning in his eyes for a brief moment. I am the god of thunder, he spoke slowly. I am Thor. Chapter 45. Starting over. I raised my hand towards Thor, who slowly grasped it with his own palm. Son of Ben, I thank you for this. I will make sure your father is deeply rested in Valhalla. My father is still here, I told Thor with a smile. It was my biological father that died in a glorious battle. And don't waste your time finding his soul, Thor. He is very far from here. I see. Thor said, you are but a mortal. And yet you know things you should not. You are very wise for a being that is not a century old. I trust your word. I smiled, flattery. I pulled him upwards before I let go. Come on, you got lost time to make up with your mother. Thor frowned before he shook his head. I am sorry, son of Ben, but she is no mother of mine. My mother is the queen of Asgard, Queen Frigga. I can't betray her love for me, even if she lied to me about who I was. There you go thinking so absent-mindedly, I chuckled. You can have two mothers and two fathers, can you not? Well, you have been sort of a father to me. Thor grinned. Would you be fine if I called you father? I ego boost. Nah, I don't really care. I shrugged. Hela would be the only one happy because it would most likely make Odin pissed off. Only it will be strange to have my little brother calling my beloved husband father. A voice chimed in with an amused tone to her voice. I didn't even need to look to know who it was. I saw a pair of arms wrapped around my neck and both breasts pressed against my back. Hello, my love. I said, what brings you here? Hela just smiled and gave me a long kiss to the cheek. She looked over to the Thor. Maybe you should make up for her. She may be a whore, but at least she is trying to own up for her mistakes. Sister. Thor nodded his head at her. Brother. He looked to me. Hela smiled at that, while I didn't know what to think. I felt a little bit happy, I guess, but that was only because I was a Marvel fan and a fan of Thor. Of course I don't let that decide my actions. I only did this for Hela, if not for her. I'd have no part of it. That family drama is on a whole nother level of soap opera. I make no promise. Thor said, but I shall try. I smiled. That's all I ask, Thor. I said with a grin. Come on. You know, you're even worse than Goldilocks. Jine deadpanned. Please stop it with the depressed atmosphere. I don't know, child, Gaia spoke softly. Thor was one of my greatest children and I missed out on him. I fucked up. From what I have read, you seem to do that a lot. Gohan said softly, you have a lot of children other than Thor, do you? Some that rivals Grandpa's age, and others that rivals our own. Gaia flinched, but she nodded slowly. You can start by being with them. Gohan smiled, sure not everyone would want you to be near them, but I am sure some would. Or you can just keep pestering him until he says yes. Zellara adds flatly, that always helps with me whenever I am annoyed with my father. Aunt Gaia is in an entirely different situation than our Zellara. Gohan deadpanned. Zellara shrugged. I actually think that is the best choice of action, Tina said, with making amends with every single child on this planet. That sounds like too much work. Hey, I'm not that bad. Gaia defended. Everyone stared at her with deadpanned expressions. She pouted, okay, maybe I am that bad. But I can't help but need to scratch an itch that needs scratchin'. Father said you were a bad influence, so I am so happy he warned us about you. Zellara says flatly. Jine nods her head in agreement. Yeah, I am not doing that till I am at least 16 years old, and even then, it is with someone I might grow to love. Not with every single person I find hot like you've. Gaia pouts, before she smirks at Jine. Oh? So you find me hot, do you? Jine glares at her in a glare that reminded Gaia of Hela. I do not swing that way. There is nothing wrong with liking the opposite gender, Gaia coos. I heard you already find your father attractive. Isn't that worse? Jine stiffens, and her glare falters for a second. Yeah, father is hot, but he is not a girl. Zellara responded. Jine looked up at her gratefully. Zellara nodded her head at her. Mistress Earth. A voice sighs exasperated. Stop trying to corrupt my daughters. Zellara stiffens as she remembers what her father said during their training session together. Gaia stiffens as well. For a different reason entirely. She looks up and locks eyes with her son, who looks up at her with a look of indifference in his face. His eyes, though, they hold conflict. Thor. She whispered. Lady Gaia. She flinched at her name being used. She guessed it was too soon to be called mother. I do not think I would ever see you as a mother, Thor said softly. That title belongs to the current queen of Asgard, Lady Frigga. Thor looked down and clenched his fist. Even though she lied for me, she was there for me, she sacrificed for me, and she was with me for the thousands of years of my life. I do not think I will ever see you as a mother to me. Thor looked up into her eyes as he said this. Gaia flinched. Before she looked down, she deserved this. Thor looked at her, before he raised his fingers towards her chin and lifted her head up till she was back to eye level. But that does not mean I cannot give you a chance to be my friend. Thor smiled. I may not see you as a mother, but you did at least try to make amends. That is something I respect. Gaia was stunned for a moment. The words of Thor playing her over and over again in her head. But that does not mean I cannot give you a chance to be my friend. I may not see you as a mother, but you did at least try to make amends. That is something I respect. She looked at him. Before she smiled, her eyes gained a look of determination. She was given a second chance. She was not going to fuck this up again. Chapter 46. Lost Time. After a while, Thor, Hela, Gaia and I were walking outside. We decided to go to a mall. Hela, I and Gaia were dressed casually. I decided to get Thor some clothes that resembled Thor Ragnarok. So Loki turned into a snake and he bit me. Thor said with a chuckle. I thought it was just a snake. That doesn't sound very pleasant, Thor. Gaia said with a frown. It was just a harmless prank. He said, but there are moments where he goes too far. Does lying to you about his father's throne mean anything to you? Hela asked. He may have had a bond with you long ago, but I do not think he remotely cares about anyone but himself. Thor nodded, as did I at one point, but you gave me a chance. I think he deserves a second chance as well. He looked back at me, then back to Hela. After all, he is merely a victim of father as well as yourself. And imagine you. As you told me, as horrid as you were given a second chance. Do not you think my brother deserves the same? Hela looked away. Her fist clenched and black lightning arcs across her body slightly. Do not compare me to that pest. Hela growled. Thor flinched. She closed her eyes and she sighed. Though you do have a point, Thor. I will not care for him, but if you decide to give him a chance, I shall tolerate him as well. Also there might be a chance that Loki is my son as well? Gaia mutters weakly. We all stared at her. She was about to bow her head when we sensed something, as did Hela and Gaia. The three of them glanced to the right. I noticed they had a power level that was 30%. Hela was when I met her for the first time. Gaia seemed to recognize them. More Asgardians, she said. Thor continued to stare at Gaia, intensely making her more nervous. Shall we greet our guests then? Hela decided to ignore Gaia for now. I did the same. That was enough of the drama for now. We will continue this later. Actually, I do remember something about Gaia taking the form of a frost giant or something while she was away. I shook my head. I could be wrong. But later, I don't want to deal with this right now. I frowned before I realized what they were if my assumptions were correct. This could be interesting. I shrugged. Sure. I have time. Thor broke his gaze from Gaia, much to her relief. We will talk about this later, he said slowly. Gaia nodded quickly, and all of them changed paths. Coulson raced in as a shield technician pulled up the footage of a rainbow-colored storm. This was so unlike anything they had ever seen, much like this. Coulson sighed, as normally he would be shocked by this. But being with Andrew for a year or two had made him realize that anything was technically possible. Hell, Andrew was a magic sorcerer that was married to the goddess of death from Norse mythology. Things do not get any weirder than that. Coulson looked to the screen and realized that these were the same readings that he felt 8 years ago, only slightly different. He realized that this could be a possible alien invasion and sighed. What have you gotten yourself into this time, Andrew? The Warrior 3 and Sif dropped to the ground in the City of Queens. They all clamber to their feet, as the Bifrost quickly recedes, causing the hole that was in the sky to close up from behind it. Now. Bifrost runes Vochier the desert sand around them. He must have landed nearby. Volstagg muttered softly, glancing to the sky then to the ground. It's time to put our tracking skills to work. Spread out. Check the SND indentations of his boot prints. Impossible. Vandrel responded. We should look for signs of a campfire. Or we should start there. Sif pointed to the trail ahead of her. She saw an elementary school, followed by multiple buildings, and a path that cuts through them all, with other paths cutting through that path. What a most peculiar maze. Volstagg remarks, trying to hide the fact that his own ego had been slightly bruised. Hogan just winced. The citizens, meanwhile, stared in wonder as the Asgardians walked through the city. They didn't seem to get very far as they managed to come across a group of people. Two of the most beautiful women they had ever seen. A man they assumed was a Midgardian warrior. Sif had to slightly blush at his cheese-led form. The warriors of Asgard were built, but not quite like him. Some were too muscled to a point where it was disgusting. Others were too skinny, she didn't seem to care much about it. But this man looked like he was built by the Allfather and all of his fathers before him, to be the perfect male, the perfect warrior. And then another mid. Wait a minute. He looks familiar. Thor stares in surprise as well as he sees his friends standing there before him. Thor eventually gained his composure and grinned so wide his grin almost managed to split his face. My friends. Chapter 47. Incoming. The two of us stood face to face from each other, Hela and Vogtag, I and Sif, Gaia and Hogun, Fandral and Thor. Without thinking, Thor rushed in and hugged his friends. He squeezed them tightly. I have never been happier to see anyone. We are here to bring you home, Thorb. Thor looked down at this. I am afraid I am not ready to home yet. My friends. Sif's eyes widened in shock. Thor. What are you saying? I do not have my hammer, Thor replied, which means I cannot come home as I do not have the strength that I had once wielded. I am but an average Midgardian now. A Midgardian, with the strength of an Olympic athlete. I added helpfully, which isn't much but it is still something to be thought about. And just who are you? Sif asked. Who are you indeed? Voltag grins lustfully as he ogles Hela and Gaia, my fists clenched sightly, as he saunters over to them. Hello my dears, I dash. Crack. Eehee. The Asgardian males winced as Hela kneed him in the balls resulting in a loud crack. Gaia smiles. Hello dear, she says back cheerfully as well like nothing happened. How are you this fine evening? He groans in pain, knees buckled, and hands covered in his balls. Thor shook his head as he too winced at the impact. My friends. I'd like to introduce you to Kakarot Lady Gaia and Hela. Hela is my sister and Kakarot's wife. Thor. Did you hit your head here coming to Midgard? Fandral asked. Not only does she not look anything like you, no offense, it is all common knowledge that you only have one sibling, that is Loki. Thor smiled. Indeed. Sif glanced in between Hela and I. She looked disappointed. I shook my head. Sorry Sif, Hela beat you to it, and I will take her over you any day. You're 5 out of 10. Hela is a 100 out of 10. Suddenly the sound of screaming catches everyone off guard. Shall we go then? Hela asked. Who do you think it is? Loki. Thor and I muttered at the same time. We glanced at each other. Go deal with the civilians. Thor nodded. I'll handle this. Who are you to demand orders of Thor mortal? Sif asked. I ignored her. Her eyebrow twitched. Fool, he thinks just because he is very attractive, and is married to Thor's sister, he can do whatever the in the 9 hells he wants. Sif. Thor growls. What you must understand is that Kakarot is no ordinary mortal, so please treat him with respect. But, Thor. All of his friends were stunned. This was not the Thor they remember. At his look, she glanced back at Thor then back at me, who raises his forearms and clenches his fist. All right. It has been far too long since I fought someone other than my family. Her eyes admittedly lingered longer onto those muscles of his as they squeezed perfectly while he clenched. Sif shook her head. I agree with you, my dear. Hela said with a dark smirk on her face. As she steps up cracking her knuckles, Hela was pulled to the side. My smirk growing. Sorry dear, this one is mine. I took a step only to be pulled to the side by Hela. I looked up at Hela in surprise as she smirks at me. Sorry dear, but this one is mine. I agree with you, dear. I pulled her aside. Another time, I smirked in the distance. This one is mine. I took a step backward only to face plant into the ground. I look back up to see Hela with a smirk on her face, grabbing my ankles with my legs raised in the air. Sorry dear. She spun me around before flinging me off. I disappeared and put her in a headlock. She struggled to break free. My beloved husband, she said sweetly. Yes dear. I asked with a smug smirk. Hela raised her elbows before she flipped me over judo style and slammed me into the ground. I win, she said. She took a step but before she could I raised 2 fingers from where I laid. Sparks of magic shot from the 2 fingers and shot towards Hela, condensing into a small whip shape. It wrapped around Hela and before I yanked Hela, who let out an adorable yelp before she was yanked behind me, I slowly got up from the small crater which was laid. I put my foot onto it causing orange sparks to fix the crater in a matter of seconds. All right. My fist slammed into my palm. Let's do this. I sidestepped just in time as a bolt of lightning pierced the ground beside me. Hela swayed towards me hammer in hand, spinning like lightning. If you could see the surprised faces of Thor's faces. It was priceless. Yo! How? Impossible! Sif spluttered as she and the rest of the Warrior Three's jaw dropped at the sight before them. Thor. No. It was Hela. She was carrying Thor's hammer, with all of his powers. Well, I'll beam. Fandral muttered. I grinned at her as I got in a turtle hermit stance. I memorized this from my memories as a Dragon Ball fan. Bring it on, Hela. I smirked at her. Or, we could not do this and we both could fight together? Gaia suggested, how about a friendly couples competition? Whoever destroys the threat the fastest wins. Hela and I exchanged glances, before we both smirked. The next thing you know, we both vanished, leaving only after images of us in our wake. This might turn out to be a disappointment, but this is a competition after all. Although I do love my wife to death, no way in Hela was I letting my wife win. Gaia followed after them. The warrior 3 and Sif stares on with wide eyes. Thor. Just who are these mortals? Voltax finally asked after he gathered himself together. Thor closed his eyes and simply chuckled. Chapter 48. One Punch. Chaos was in the city, as everyone was running away screaming out of fear. It was either for themselves, or for their loved ones, or maybe both. Why was this happening? Well, another rainbow storm appeared, but this time, it actually dropped off a large metallic monster, who can shoot fire from its entire face. It just started to go on a rampage, destroying everything in its wake. Sonic booms after sonic booms exploded with each passing second as two streaks of black and white shot through the air at blinding speeds. Hela's eyes crackled with black lightning as they glowed black, while my own eyes flashed golden. Hela was straining herself, but she was keeping up with me. I smirked. Serious series. Serious punch. My arm glowed a brighter shade of white as I cocked my arm back ready to strike. Hela obviously didn't need or want to say a name to her attack, but if her husband wanted to play that game, then she should oblige as well. She admitted, it was also kind of fun in a way. She cocked her own arm back as her arm glowed a darker shade of black. Ultimate death. Ultimate end. In sync. The two rushed towards the destroyer to the public. They could only see a streak of black and white heading straight for the metal monster. The destroyer saw it, but it had no time to turn before. Asterisk bang. Hela and I punched the destroyer with all of our might. A few seconds later. Overkill, because the second the two fists impacted the chin of the destroyer, the head just completely evaporated and a stream of high-pressured wind shot from their fists into the sky. Silence. Pure unadulterated silence. That was fun. I said, breaking the silence with a wide grin on my face, my fists smoking from the power the attack held. Even if it was for a brief moment. Hela chuckled, her fist smoking from her own power as well. Indeed. She looked at the aftermath and saw the destruction their attack caused. We should probably fix that though. I saw it too, and scratched the back of my head sheepishly. Yeah, sorry. Got caught up in the moment. This time, he actually began to raise his hand in the air. An orange glow then enveloped it before it transferred over to the damaged parts of the city. It was like someone rewinded time, as the city slowly pulled itself back together again. With his other hand he twitched his fingers, orange sparks shimmered into existence. Before the body of the headless destroyer fell through, the portal vanished. Hela and I walked away like nothing happened. When the light happened, I released the spell. Once the light died down, everyone gasped and was muttering to each other. But we were nowhere in sight. Alright, let's... Wait, what? Jine asked as she sees nothing going on but everyone looking in amazement at seemingly nothing. Or wondering what just happened. What just... Hey! A hand grabs Jine before yanking her back through the portal. The portal closed. That only lasted a couple of seconds, as the people thought they saw a little girl and a magic portal, but they just shrugged it off, and thought they were seeing things. Other people were skeptical, and wanted. They met up with Gaia, who had her arms crossed. Oh? And who won? It was a tie. I grinned, but the threat is no more. If you could call it that. Hela scoffs and crossed her arms. Extremely disappointing. Gaia giggled. Well, now you know how Saratama feels all the time. I blinked. What? What you think just because I am the Earth itself I can't watch your anime? She asked. I stared at her in surprise. Did I just turn Gaia into an anime nerd? I shook my head out of my daze, and powered down. Hela did the same, and looped her arm under mine. My fingers twitched and a portal opened up. We walked through and the portal closed. Thor, do they truly think they can handle whatever is coming? Fandral asked after he managed to get his composure together. Kakarot is the mightiest warrior in Midgard, quite possibly in Asgard as well. Thor shrugged his shoulders and smiled at their disbelief. My eldest sister is much more stronger than me even without her being worthy of my hammer. Thor looked at the spot where they vanished. If anything of what they told me is true, then Kakarot is stronger than Hela, which makes him stronger than me, so both can handle themselves. Once again the 3-6 looked at him in amazement, as they never would have thought Thor would say such a thing. And the fact that Thor had a sister? It is mind-boggling. And, you trust their word? This time it was Hogun who asked it. Thor nodded, of course. If she held the hammer you can trust her. Damn. He weakly groans. I pity you. Fandral remarks. The portal opened up, and what they were messing with. Welcome back my family, and Lady Gaia. He nods his head to her. Gaia flinches. Something the Warrior 3 notices but didn't question it as they decided to remain silent. Chapter 49. Ignorance. With me, I gazed at Thor and nodded to him. I think you are ready to be worthy once again, Thor. I said with a small smile, Odin really did a number on you. And you deserved it, but knowing you I think you'd be ready now. The spell, I can get rid of. It might take a lot of work, and some time, and maybe a little draining, but I can get rid of it, after seeing Thor's behavior. I know he has changed from the spoiled princess he was. Don't be ridiculous. Voltag scoffs. You think you can undo what the All-Father himself placed on Thor? Do you think yourself mightier than the All-Father? I don't know yet, I haven't met him. I said nonchalantly. But I do know that I can get rid of this spell that is making him mortal-like. Don't be ridiculous. Hela gave me a gentle nudge. I have seen Odin go all out in his battles before. You can easily beat him in a match. I dunno. I had heard multiple myths of Odin and his strength. If he is MCU Odin definitely. Comic book Odin a lot harder but I could win. Mythology Odin. I really do not know. Or even worse, overpowered buff Odin, that one seems unlikely. I can never truly judge a person until I have met them in person. I scratched the back of my bad. I smiled in a way that resembled Son Goku's famous sun grin and scratched the back of my head. But the fight would be fun, right? Well, for me it would be fun. Hela said with a dark smirk, I would love to beat the shit out of Odin for what he did to me. But for you, it might be extremely disappointing. Heresy. Sif growled. How dare you speak of the All-Father like that? Oh, Hela said with a mocking smile. And what would you do about that? Sif lunged at her with a neck. Hela seemingly teleported in front of Sif. Sif had no time to react before she managed to spit out blood. Her eyes rolled to the back of her head, and she fainted. Hela scoffed and tossed Sif to the side. Goddess of battle? Pathetic. Sif. My friends know. Thor growled. But, Sif. You would attack over mere insults? Thor asked. We are warriors but we are not brutes. I chuckled. The fans would not believe this is the Thor they know. I whispered to myself. What was that, dear? Hela tilted her head to the side to look at me. Did you say something? I shook my head. Nothing to worry about, dear. I twitched my fingers and a portal opened up. Come on. He went through the portal. Hela followed after. The Warrior 3 stared. Thor nodded and patted Hogun on the shoulder. Well then. He followed. Interesting, you three are. Gaia said with a smirk, as she turned and crossed the portal. Loki was furious, but also very fearful. In all his years he had never seen a mortal with such power. No one ever had such pure power as these two mortal, no. His sister had, yes, it was simply impossible for a mortal to have this power. As they saw them rush forward, he couldn't keep track of their movements. It was a blur. And that mortal. Who was he? Kakarot? That's what he was called? One of the strangest names he had ever heard of. He had the same power as well, and Hela looked like she was straining herself while Kakarot looked like he was enjoying himself. Suddenly, to be able to disrupt himself on Midgard quite easily. It is all starting to make sense. He couldn't possibly be mortal, could he? Was he even mortal? He doesn't want to know, he doesn't want to care. But he could not help it. It was fear of the unknown that he must know the answer. Loki. A voice said so soft it was but a whisper, but held power like no other. Loki felt his blood go cold as he slowly turned to the source of the voice, to spot Odin, behind him. Father. I can explain. Odin slowly shook his head. No, Loki. Loki clenched his fist on the golden scepter so tightly he began to shake. Not thinking clearly, and still stressed from the recent events he contemplated on whether or not he should just kill Odin, or sway him to his side. Loki stared at Odin. No. At times, Loki could be seen as an idiot, blinded by jealousy after constantly living in the shadow of his brother. He may have been blinded, but he was not an idiot. After the power that he had seen, Odin was no match for the two. After what was shown to him, he was no match for him. He should just kill him right now. He contemplated. On Midgard, Thor. He came in contact with a couple of mortals. One of whom he called sister. She turned out to be worthy of his hammer. Loki said. He paused for a moment to let it sink in. Thor had introduced her as Hela. The moment Loki said that, Odin stiffened. Loki smirked. I see so. I was right after all. Loki muttered. Yet another one of your lies you kept hidden? You know not of what you speak. Odin mumbled. Oh, I think I know enough. Loki growled. Loki made his decision. This was no fluke. Hela was no mortal, and Odin he could sway him to his side. But even with his help, he would not do much against Hela and Cockroach. He would only be in the way. Loki attacked Odin. But one thing Loki forgot was that Odin was still powerful, still mighty. Even if he wasn't the same as he was in his prime, even if he was still drowsy from his Odin sleep. Loki had underestimated the Allfather, and that had costed him. Odin grabbed Loki's wrists and yanked the scepter out of his hand. Loki quickly realized that the situation was not in his favor. Quickly scrambled back and he disappeared. Odin closed his eyes and he let out a sigh. Everything was not going as planned. I suppose it is his fault after all. Legions of mistakes had led to this moment. All his mistakes. He believed he was doing the right thing at the moment. In spite of everything, after dreaming of everything in his Odin sleep, he realized that he was a horrible father. And he realized that so many things were wrong. But his eyes snapped open. Pitying himself will get him nowhere. He must fix everything. He walked towards the place, even at the cost of his own life. He would do whatever it takes to make Asgard whole again. Chapter 50. Worthy. All of us walked into the room to spot my children just sitting watching TV. It was the incident involving what just happened. You know what, Dad? Jine said, with a small pout. You could have saved some for me to fight? I chuckled. Sorry, Jine. I poked her in the forehead with a finger. Maybe next time. Jine looked at Thor's friends. I guess you're Goldilocks buddies. Indeed they are, young one. Thor smiled softly. These are my friends, my friends. This young lady and the other two are my nieces and nephews. It seems that you've been busy then. Voltags muttered, feeling slightly jealous. You must love to make love to each other at the nights. At the nights, in the day, whenever we feel like it. Hela smirked, grabbing my arm and leaning into it. Jealous? Over a mortal? Voltag scoffed. Oh please, I bet I could have you screaming my name more louder than that pathetic piece of mortal trash. Hela didn't seem to take too kindly to that. She was suddenly in front of him, hands grabbing his neck. She lifted him up in the air. Voltag was chalking. He attempted to pull her by the wrists, and was pulling with all his might, but not one budge. He tried to speak. But he couldn't. It came out as gibberish as her hands squeezed tighter onto his neck. The nails on his neck dug in so deeply it drew blood. Hela wanted to rip his head clean off of his neck. Oh, I am sorry, Hela said as she smirked. Could you say that one more time? I couldn't quite catch that. That is enough, Hela. Thor said. Hela ignored him, and clenched his neck tighter. Voltag screamed out in pain. Please, my lady. Let go. Fandral pleaded. He did not mean what he said. Hela looked to him, her lips turning into a dark smirk which caused him to shiver slightly in fear. The kids just watched on. They were not used to this, but they were told of her mother's tendencies by their father. So, although they might not agree with what it is she is doing, they understand, so they don't place any judgment on her. Gaia knows that anything she says or does could not change anything either. She only cares because he is her son's friend, but she knows that Asgardians are oblivious and think themselves as superior to humans. Just like all gods. Including her at one point before she met her student. Who taught her as much as she taught him, even more. I wrapped my arms around Hela's waist and squeezed gently. Her eyes soften at this action, and her grip around Voltag's neck. Listen, it's all right. I whisper to her, Earb, let go. She of course hesitates, but she does what she is told. She squeezes tighter, making him scream even louder in pain. Before she lets go, dropping him to the floor, his knees created a small dent in the floor. He put his hands on his knees and started to pant heavily. Hela leans into my chest and I smile at her. Before I turn to the others, everyone but my children and Thor. Look scared shitless. Thor just shook his head. He knows how cruel Hela can be. But perhaps this was needed. After all, that is how he was able to change. I shook my head and smiled at Thor. All right, are you ready to have your powers back, Thor? Thor frowned. I do not know. The hammer does not yet see me as worthy. Thor. You are more worthy than you realize now than you ever were before. I smirked. You just don't realize it yet. I looked to him and used my spell, Magic Eyes. It was a spell I was working with a while. It helped me see the magic inside his body with my eyes to let me know how to work it, and to my surprise, it wasn't how it was as if Odin's magic was restricting his own, and the magical bond between himself and the hammer had been restricted as well. I sighed. It was like Odin wrapped his magic around his, restricting Thor from ever gaining access until he is worthy in Odin's eyes. I tugged on it. It didn't budge. I tugged on it some more. It budged, but slightly. I smirked. Is something the matter? Thor asked. I shook my head. No. Everything is fine. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath before I opened them. Brace yourself. As soon as he said that, Thor tensed, and I unrestricted his restrictions. The clouds suddenly gathered. Before suddenly. Asterisk boom. Lightning burst forth through the roof of the house, and crashed into Thor, with Hela. Thor closed his eyes as he could feel his power once again within him. With Hela, Thor smiled as he emerged from his spot with energy and powers once again within him. His eyes glowed blue before they faded. He was in the same Asgardian armor and cape that I saw Hela in, with a Viking helmet and everything. Thor smirked. It's good to be back, he said. Thor looked at Hela, and more specifically the hammer in Hela's hand. He raised his hand. The hammer vibrated, as if heeding his call and wanted to fling towards him, but Hela's hand clenched onto it. I changed my mind, Hela said. I am keeping it. It is mine after all. Thor frowned. Just get a new one? I said with a smile. I heard that the dwarfs make Asgardian weapons. Maybe you can ask him for a more powerful one or something. After all, it's not like you're the god of hammers, right? Unless you want to fight me for it, Hela said with a smirk on her face. Thor shook his head. Without my hammer, I am Afriad. I have no control over my power. What are you, the god of hammers? Hela scoffed. Or the god of thunder. I don't need this. I could give this to you. She pointed her hammer at Thor. But this is my hammer, not yours. It was made for me, not you. It was taken from me. And given to you. Do you understand? Thor gave a slow nod. Hela smirked. Good beasts, if you truly want a hammer, or a weapon to use, go get your own. She paused for a moment. Or learn how to control your power like father taught me. Chapter 51. Dodge. Although I would love to beat the shit out of Voltag, are you sure this is a good idea? Thor needs people to back him up. Hela said, I have you. And I wasn't talking about Voltag or any of his friends for that matter. I was talking about Sif. I frowned at her. She rolled her eyes. Look, it is clear that Sif finds you attractive, only because, if the myths are right, then Thor is such a moron when it comes to love. Hogun and Fandral nodded. He can be at times. Fandral nodded his head with a small smirk. Thor frowned, but nodded his head, much to the shock of the three. He really has changed. Fandral muttered. Voltag just remained silent. He was massaging his own neck from the pain. I raised an eyebrow. That's hardly fair. I remember when I met you. You hardly remembered what love is. You showed me. Hela smirked. I want to teach Thor the same. I felt uncomfortable. Not like that. Hela rolled her eyes. Just, ugh, teach her some things. Wouldn't it be wiser to teach Thor? I asked. He is a male after all? Yes. But he is my brother. Hela kissed me on the lips. He turned to the warrior three. Run along to Asgard. Thor would be with you in a couple of months. The All-Father would hear of this. Hogun warned. It was not really much of a threat, but of a warning. Hela noticed he seemed to be more of a reliable and wiser of the group, something she respected slightly more than the rest. So, Hela smirked. If he wants to know where Thor is, tell Odin he is now worthy. But her sister is training him to use his powers without his hammer, something you should have done a long time ago. Thor sighed. So when do we get started? He asked. She raised her finger, before she pointed it at Sif. A bolt of black lightning shot from her finger, electrocuting her. She spasmed before she awoke with a start, still spasming. She glanced at me. Well, you take care of her. I'll take care of my brother. WWHZZZ ad is going on? Sif asked in between slight spasms as she was confused. Sif, apparently you're going to be trained by Kakarot. Fandral replies with an unsure look. Good luck. Her eyes immediately landed on me. I nodded at her. She blushed slightly. So, she does find you attractive. Fandral muttered. This should be fun to watch. A couple of hours later, I pinned Sif to the ground. She let out a scream of pain as her back impacted the floor hard. Come on, Sif. If you want to be by Thor's side, you're going to have to do better than that. You are distracting. Sif growled, face heated up. And how is it possible for you to beat me so easily? You are just a mortal. Hela said the same thing. I said with a grin as I got up from on top of her, you are using too much brawn instead of brain. Here. Fight with your power. Be your power besides. Didn't Thor tell you about me? Well, I didn't believe that a mere mortal had strength that surpassed Asgard. Sif scoffed, and crossed her arms. I do believe you to be the mightiest of Midgard. I raised a hand which she grasped, and she did a motion. I recognized as herself trying to flip me over and slam me into the ground. Unfortunately for her, I was too strong. NGH. She grunted as she continued to pull at me with all of her might. I was crushing her pride as a goddess of battle. I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy that. You done feeling up my wrist? I replied with a smirk. You do realize I am married, right? Quiet. I smirked, and with a flick of my wrist, her grip on mine broke. I pushed her back, causing her to stumble. I got into my turtle hermit stance. Come on. Again. Hela crossed her arms, as she and Thor stood across from each other, so you will forgive me if I am not clear enough. The only other people I had ever taught was my own children. Thor nodded. So, the first lesson. Hela trailed off, eyes narrowing at Thor as her lips stretched into a mad grin. Thor admits, he was nervous. That is. 2 pitch black orbs of pure energy formed into Hela's hand. Her grin grew as Thor tensed. Dodge. Odin frowned. He had just been reported of everything that went down on Midgard by Thor's friends. Hela still hasn't gotten over what happened in the past, and wants to fight him? He was not an idiot. If this mortal really was holding Hela back from conquest, then he owes the him? No. He dared to bed his daughter without his consent. So, he should punish him for it, and punish his daughter too. She is the goddess of death. He had raised her better to be raised by a Midgardian of all beings. But Odin sighed. Still, he is conflicted about all of this. He knows this mortal has changed Hela somehow. Otherwise she would have found herself on Asgard already. He saved them. Trouble? And oh, he should see for himself, and he should have a talk with this mortal. Not right now, of course. Hela should help her brother first. Him interfering would only hinder Thor. When everything is done, he shall interfere, and have a few words with his mortal, just to see if he is worthy enough to bed his daughter. He doubts it. Better hope it's the latter than the former. Otherwise the mortal will be nothing but a hollow corpse. No one thinks they can just bed his daughter like that without him knowing and not face the consequences. Odin closed his eye and sighed. But, if he did change his daughter's heart, or she is merely manipulating the mortal for her own goals. Odin sighed, still conflicted, however. He will get everything resolved soon. Chapter 52. Bonding. A couple of months have passed since the two of us had started training Thor and Sif. A lot has happened since then. Well, a lot between the two at least. I was nervous as a wreck before. Sif and Thor had gotten closer. Sif still thought I was one gorgeous mortal man. And as flattering as that was, I was married to the most beautiful woman I have ever met. Thor was making great progress, but he wasn't ready to beat his father up just yet. His father had multiple millennia of experience and power, not to mention the Odin force in his hand, and I wasn't sure which version of Thor. Like I could tell with this Thor, he is like Hela. He has the looks like MCU Thor, but it is more enhanced, more godly. Like he has buffed up, and a lot more stronger. He had become like God of War Thor in a way. But he still looks like Chris Hemsworth. Sort of. It's hard to explain. With Hela, she looks nothing like her MCU counterpart, but looks like her comic book counterpart, and her cartoon counterparts. She definitely has surpassed all of her counterparts in terms of power. She may resemble MCU Hela, but she looks nothing like her. It's strange, but at the same time, we are living inside something that should not remotely be possible. So everything is out of the question, I guess. Same with Sif, by the way. Sif was awkward around the kids, much to Jine's annoyance, and quickly she made sure to change that. Sif was surprised at the same strength, but then again, they were birthed from Asgardian royalty, and reluctantly, she admitted me. Hela and Thor. Hela beat Thor senseless before healing him. I taught her a thing or two related to magic spells. Thor had grown in durability as well as skill, and slowly he began to grow in strength as well. His magic power although increased because of Hela, it still didn't matter. But over time, his own strength and power increased, as he learned from his mistakes. He learned from his beatings. Thor was pinned to the ground with Hela on top of him. Gah! Is that the best you can do? Hela growled. She pushed her blade deeper to his throat, causing him to bleed. I should not have wasted my time with you. Hela snarled. You are not worth any time. You're wrong. Thor growled, his hand on Hela's wrists. If only I had a sitch. Hela pushed the blade deeper to his throat, causing his throat to bleed. On Ly. I had my hammer. You're not thinking, Thor? Hela snarled, her blades disappeared. Thor sighed in relief, only for him to grunt in pain again, as her forearm went against his throat. You are thinking only as the god of hammer. That hammer was modified to control you power. But it wasn't your power. Not even close. It is within you. Thor growled. Think about everything you have. Hela said softly, my beloved told me, the power comes to a response to a need, not a desire. She said softly, my desire. My desire was to protect Kakarot. I did not want him to fall. No matter how strong he was still just a mortal. Hela's eyes traveled back to the past, as she remembered a specific incident. Flashback. My beloved. You said you would be with me for all eternity, and beyond. Hela spoke softly as the two of us walked together on the sidewalk, fingers locked together. Hela was in a dark green dress while I was dressed in a tuxedo. I had just proposed to her, which she had accepted wholeheartedly. I did. I said with a smile. It was the most happiest smile I had ever made. I did say I would be with you for an eternity. How? Hela swallowed. How is that possible, if you are just a mortal? I kissed her on the lips gently, which she recuperated. It was a long while before I broke. Don't worry about it, my dear. My hand was raised to slowly caress her cheek. Focus on the moment, and I promise, it will be the best moments you had ever experienced. Flashback end. Her eyes began to water as the blade dug deeper into his throat. His promise was kept, she whispered. I did what he told me to do, and these 8 years on Midgard had been the best moments of my long life. Thor was listening intently to his sister's words. Unfortunately, she muttered, all good things come to an end. He will die, and I will live on. I could start a crusade, in hopes of finding an answer, that would help cure him of his mortality. But then by that time, he would have already been dead. So, I fear of his end, so I use that as my power. I train with Kakarot whenever I have the time. To grow in power. To grow in strength. Thor nodded. I see. So that's how you were able to grow so strong in such a short amount of time. Thor muttered. To protect those you cherish. Indeed. Hela glanced at Thor. I have said my piece, now. You know what you must do. But first before you grow in power, learn to control it. All you have to do is reach inside you and pull it out. Thor closed his eyes and sighed. There was a long moment, before. His eyes suddenly snapped open, his eyes glowed blue. Hela smirked at this. Thor roared, as a bolt of lightning crashed down. Impacting the both of them, the area exploded, dust and debris everywhere. Once everything could be seen, Thor was still pinned to the ground, but his eyes were glowing blue and his body danced with electricity. Hela remained unfazed, but a smirk formed its way onto Hela's face. Good. Hela smirked. Now we move on. Sif and Thor got closer together during those months. Sif began to see me as a teacher rather. No, she still found me attractive. But her love for Thor grew more better. Thor was of course confused at first, but once Hela quite literally beat him in the head with it, he began to gain some sense. He began to give Sif a chance, even though he didn't harbor the same feelings as she did. But over time, that changed. Thor saw Sif as a worthy woman. A friend who stood by his side from the very beginning. With Gaia, Thor didn't much care for her as a mother. But he gave her a chance, and so far she did not mess things up. Things began tense with her. I could feel it mending though, the relationship, if ever so slowly. Chapter 53. The Abomination. The four of us walked slowly towards the chaos. Everyone was screaming in fear and running away. You could hear the chaos, everywhere. There were explosions, sounds of explosions, but as everyone was running away, as I said, the four of us were walking in towards it, without an ounce of fear. Two were excited, one was slightly interested, and the other bored. Of course I am referring to Thor and Sif, I and Hela, in that order. Sif looped her arm through Thor's, leaning against him, while Hela did the same with mine. This attractive couple walked towards the area. Before a figure flung towards us at great speeds, I of course stepped in and caught the figure. My eyes widened in surprise as I recognized who it was. Jennifer? I asked. Her eyes widened in surprise as she recognized me as well. Andrew? She grinned. Well, I'll be damned, it's been a while. It has. I smiled at her. Hela frowned. Who is this woman? This is Jennifer. Hela. I introduced. She is my childhood friend. I looked to Hela and back to Jennifer. Jennifer. This is Hela, she is my wife. Lucky bastard. Jennifer said with a smirk towards Hela. She was very jealous of her. At least I know you're not gay. You did ignore all of my advances. I sighed as Hela smirked right back and hugged my arm tighter. Indeed I am. S.H.E. Hulk. The voice of the Abomination roared. Ugh? Jessica groaned. As she slowly got out of my arms, she stretched her arms out, ignoring the cracking sounds. That was one hell of a punch. She glanced back at me. So, are you guys joining in or? I shook my head. Nah, I figured I and Hela student should be able to join. Her eyes landed on Thor and she whistled. Hot damn. Hey, you single? I deadpanned at her as Sif glared. No, he is not. Eyes off or I force them off. She raised her hands. Okay. Calm down. She glanced at the Abomination, who had seemed to spot them and was making their way towards them. Impressive speeds to Thor and Sif. But to Hela and I it was nothing. Thor grinned. Well then, shall we? He looked at Sif, who smirked at him. You first. Thor shrugged. Before he started to walk towards the oncoming beast, the clouds suddenly darkened as his eyes glowed blue. He clenched his fist, before he smirked as his walk turned into a run, before slammed into it. The abomination was flung a couple miles back into a building. The building crumbled. Jennifer's eyebrows rose in surprise. Did not see that coming, she muttered. She glanced at me. Where do you find these people? I shrugged. They come to me, I just roll. Of course you do. Sif walked towards them. You could hear the abomination roaring in anger, as he jumped up to the surface, smashing through the destroyed debris or throwing it to the side. He glared at Thor. So, princess, you wish to fight me? Thor's eyebrow twitched, before the abomination was suddenly launched to the side by Sif. She-Hulk smirked. Well, I can't let them have all the fun, can I? She grinned at me. It was nice seeing you, Andrew. She lunged at the abomination and punched him in the face. The abomination staggered. You bitch, he growled. Fuck you too. She-Hulk grinned, as she, Thor and Sif started to beat the shit out of the abomination. While the rest were scrambling, I made myself comfortable, sitting on the ground, while Hela made her place on my lap. I brought some snacks from home, I said, offering a glazed pretzel to her. Want one? She shrugged. Sure. The two of us watched, as Thor, Sif and Jessica took them head-on. You've trained Sif well, Hela complimented as she saw Sif give a massive uppercut to the abomination, only for She-Hulk to jump up with her hands locked together and slam the abomination back down to the ground. So did you to Thor, I said with a smile as I saw Thor unleash a lightning punch towards the beast, who blocked it, but his arm spasmed. He punched Thor, but Thor dodged it and grabbed onto his wrist before lifting him up and slamming him down. Thor raised his fist in attempt to punch him, only for the abomination to roll out of the way. He was stomped by She-Hulk, before she was kicked into the air. Sif jumped up, grabbed him by the waist and slammed him to her knee, resulting in a loud crack. The abomination screamed in pain. He tried to attack him, but it was locked into a headlock by Thor. Sif and She-Hulk smirked at each other before both of them unleashed a barrage of blows. The abomination struggled, but every time he was losing strength. This Thor was a lot stronger, so he could match the abomination in strength. The abomination was growing tired and weak. He still continued to struggle trying to punch Thor off of him, but Thor wouldn't let go. Eventually Thor grew tired of this, and he launched the mother of all lightning bolts towards himself and the abomination. Sif, thinking, quickly grabbed She-Hulk and backed away right before the lightning bolts struck the god and beast. Plus bang. The lightning faded and the abomination stood spasming on the ground unconscious. Thor panted. Chapter 54. She-Hulk. Well, that was fun, Jennifer replied, as she gazed at me in the distance. I nodded at her, causing her to smirk. All three of you did well, especially you, Sif. Sif nodded, satisfied with the praise. Meanwhile Thor looked at Hela. She just nodded her head at him. Thor nodded back. Hela was not one to compliment people when they do right, but she does acknowledge it. I'm surprised you're here, Andrew, Jen said. I didn't expect you to be here at all. I'm surprised you didn't know who I was, I said with a smirk. Jen, I am not exactly a nobody, you know. You never were a nobody, Jen said, at least to me. She looked away. I was busy for the past decade. A lot has happened to me. Yeah, I know. I smirked. You're green now. Thank Ross for that. Jennifer scoffed. Your dad's here as well as Bruce. He was helping but got knocked out when the thing punched him in the face. I couldn't help but sigh. What did he do this time? She opened her mouth as she was about to respond when a voice interrupted her. Jen. Two voices actually. Our eyes trailed over to the group to spot Bruce, Dad with an ice pack, Betty and Ross. Betty rushed to Jen and hugged her tightly. You stupid, stupid idiot, she cried as she hugged her tightly. Jen was embarrassed slightly. Hey Jen. I didn't know you were gay. I smirked at her. She glared at me. Don't even joke about that. You reckless girl, Ross growled. You could have gotten yourself killed, jumping in without the slightest plan. I had a plan. Jennifer smirked. Hit him really, really hard isn't necessarily a plan, Dad said in a deadpan tone, before he glanced at me and nodded. Hey son. Hey Dad, I said with a grin. How unexpected. Very, he said. What are you doing here? Well, Dad, I was just watching my students preform. I gestured to Thor and Sif. Well, Thor is Hela, Sif is mine. I thought Jen was lying when she told me you're about your strength, Bruce said with a sigh. I believe, no. I haven't technically shown any proof yet, so I can't fully believe you, but Ben here vouched for you, Sov. He looked at me and did a bow. Thank you for saving her, he said. I appreciate it. Hela tilted her head at me. Could you explain to me who these people are, dear? I am deeply confused. Oh yeah. I nodded my head. Jennifer, a long time ago I saved from Gangra **** from a bunch of thugs. I had a period of paranoia where me being here changed things for the worse, because things kept happening in front of me. It just so happened by chance where I came across She-Hulk. You can imagine my reaction when I found out who she was for the first time. Ah. So you are her knight in shining armor, Hela said with a small smirk. I nodded, yeah. Pretty much. But Dad, what are you doing here? I asked, glancing to him with my expression shifting to confusion. I thought you were at home with Ma. Bruce was the one that called me for help. Ben said, he didn't exactly have your number but Jennifer insisted on trying to find you, so he called me trying to find you through me. I didn't want to bother you so I helped out. Okay. Bruce walked up slowly towards me, before he punched me in the face. I could see a flash of green for a second. OW, what the hell is your skin made of? Why did you hit me? I asked with a raised eyebrow. For making Jen cry. Bruce. Jen cried out. Bruce ignored her and glared at me. You do realize once you rejected her, she was in her own room crying her eyes out. No one to talk to but me, all because she had feelings for her savior you rejected so harshly. I blinked and glanced at Jen who was still being embraced by Betty. I told you not to mention that. Jen cried out completely red in the face. It was funny because her skin was green, so her blush was a darker red velvet color. Oh. I muttered looking down. I guess I do deserve that, but honestly at that time, I didn't think I was ready to date yet, and I was honestly scared of love. I was scared of being heartbroken so I didn't take that chance. So you admit she was attractive? Bruce asked. Yes, she is a very beautiful woman, and it took a lot of self-control because she was coming on to me rather hard in high school. Hela narrowed her eyes at me, then at Jen. She raised her hands in surrender. Relax. I am not trying to steal your man. No matter how hot he is. She ogled my form shamelessly. Hela growled. I hugged her more tightly to my waist. She calmed down slightly. Well, I must say, I am impressed. Andrew, was it? Ross spoke up for the first time. I narrowed my eyes, but I didn't really say anything. That man was the one person I did not trust in the group, with everything he had done. I see great potential in you as a solider. Yeah. No chance in hell. I deadpanned, sorry. Chapter 55. Okay. Short chapter. I see. Ross muttered with a sigh. Another person's potential, wasted. I flipped him off, causing Jennifer to laugh and Ross to give me a dirty look. Bruce sighed while Dad rolled his eyes. Ross's question aside, I think you should give my son a break. Dad said, he didn't really trust any girls that much after the other incident with that other girl. He glanced at me, I nodded and shrugged. I didn't really care anymore, so feel free to say her name. Carol betrayed him. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. Oh, what happened there? She cheated on me a day after we went out. I said with a shrug. I never spoken this because I was appalled and slightly disappointed. Because she was my friend, but what are you gonna do? Damn. Jennifer cackled. I bet you this was before you grew into this hunk. Right? World famous and super rich on top of that. She done fucked up. I leveled up anyway. I said with a shrug, glancing at Hela with a grin. Hela is so much better than her. You would never believe. That mortal would best hope she would never meet me. Hela replied, cracking her knuckles. I would love to have a few words. Betty asked helpfully. Beatings. Hela smirked. I would love to have a few beatings with the mortal. Sif nodded in agreement, while Thor was silent. Mortal. Ross looked at her with squinted eyes. You think yourselves as better than us? Leave it be, Ross. I rolled my eyes. How many girls did you reject because of that one girl? Bruce asked. I sighed. I really don't want to talk about this, especially to someone I don't know. You can trust him, Jennifer said. He's cool. Yeah. No. I said deadpanned. Let's end this discussion now. Anna. Ben deadpanned. Anna was one. Ben. I warned. I only rejected her because she was a creepy stalker. If I didn't have powers, she would have done more than just stalk. Okay. But that doesn't excuse the other girls. What about the Japanese exchange student Issei? She was a massive pervert. I deadpanned. You know she snuck into the men's locker room just to watch me undress. She also snuck into the bathroom and peeked her head from under the stalls just to say hi and ask if you wanna fuck. Plus she reminded me so much of Issei from high school DxD, I just couldn't date her. Ha ha ha. Jennifer laughed like mad. I remember her, she was so fucking hilarious. I would have liked her if I didn't think she was trying to steal my man. Wait. Bruce intervened. He looked at Dad with a pointed stare. How do you know all of these girls? They all tried to win my approval. Ben said with a flat look. Most of them failed. Most? Dad shot Jen a slight smirk, causing her to blush slightly. Yeah, most, but none of that matters now, he said with a grin. My son is now married to a woman far more beautiful than Carol ever was and has kids of his own. Yeah. I gazed down at Hela with a fond expression on my face. Hela is the love of my life. The corners of my lips stretched to form a small smile. She changed it, and she made me whole. Hela smiled at me before she leaned up and pecked me on the lips. As you did for me, my beloved. More times than one could count. Chapter 56. Defending Father. Suddenly, a portal opened up, catching everyone's attention. Jine poked her head out through the portal. She looked at the aftermath of the battle, then at me, then at the Abomination, who was still unconscious. Ah man, again? I chuckled. Better luck next time. You said that last time, Dad. Jine said with a blank expression on her face. She finally noticed the group around me. She smiled brightly at Dad. Hey Grandpa. Hey Jine. Ben smiled at her. How are you this afternoon? I would have been better if I had to fight. Jine said cheerfully, but whatever. Gee, give it a rest, Gohan, it's fine. Jine groaned. She looked at Thor and smirked. So Goldilocks, do you want to spar? She rolled her arms, ignoring the cracks. I want to unleash my disappointment on you. Goldilocks. Jennifer laughed loudly. That's hilarious. I like you, kid. Thanks. Jine grinned unsure, as she stared at Jennifer a bit confused. Whoever you are? Jine. That's Aunt Jennifer. I said with a smile, causing her eyes to widen in surprise. Really? Jine looked to Jen for a moment, analyzing her up and down, before glancing back to me. But she's so green? Yes. I deadpanned. Yes, she is, now. Jine stared at Jen before she grinned at her. That's so cool. Hey Dad, she glanced back at me. Do you think you can make my skin green? No. But you don't need it, I said with a stern expression. She deflated. Whatever. She looked at Thor and Sif. She grabbed Sif before she could react and yanked her through the portal, before she reached out and grabbed him by the wrists, and yanked him inside. Thor quickly looked to Hela, who shrugged and smirked. The last thing we saw of Thor was a betrayed look before his figure disappeared. The portal closed. Ross gave her an interesting look that made me want to punch him in the face. So, do all of your children have these types of powers? Ross asked. Mutants. No. I said. Not mutants, merely magic. Ross hummed thoughtfully as he gazed at the spot where Thor and Jine disappeared. Stop that thinking process, Ross. I said with a frown. Touch my daughter, or any of my children. I will make you regret living. Do you know who you're threatening? Ross glared at me. I don't care. I cut him off. I don't care who you are. My glare turned deadly. Do not touch, or come near any of my children. Ross scowled at me before he had an idea. He smirked at me. I punched him in the face, knocking him out. He should be thinking this is just a dream. I said with a flat look. I hope. My dear. Hela smirked with a slight blush on her cheeks. That glare of yours, and the way you defended our daughters when you know they could handle themselves. It was so sexy. I'll say. Jennifer grinned, a blush forming on her cheeks, as she smiled lustfully. I said this before, but you lucked out, Hela. Big time. I blushed and scratched the back of my head. Ben sighed, as he walked over to Ross, picked him up, and threw him over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. Go. Make sure everything doesn't go to hell. Ben said. I smiled. You coming home for dinner? Ben smiled. I'll think about it. It was nice seeing you, son. Same here. He walked forward and gave me a one-armed hug before he left. Bruce walked over to me before he looked at me and smiled, raising his hand. It was nice to meet you, but I am afraid it's time for us to go as well. I shall see you off. I got up and put Hela aside, and shook his hand as well. Bruce looked at Hela and nodded to her. He raised his hand at her. Hela didn't shake on it, she just stared at it with an indifferent look on her face. Bruce frowned. I chuckled. Don't mind Hela, she does that with everybody. Bruce retracted his hand and chuckled. I see. Well, I won't hold it against her. I will see you. He soon followed after him. I smiled at him before. Smack. I yelped as I turned behind me. Jennifer smirked lewdly. Nice and firm, even better than what I remember it. Jen. Just because you are married won't stop me from smacking your big sexy ass. Jennifer said seductively. Hela summoned a blade and stalked towards her, growling lowly. I'll see you later, she winked at Hela, before she walked away, hips swaying in the process. That girl is going to be the death of me. I muttered as I grabbed Hela, and formed a portal below us, and the Abomination appeared, causing us both to disappear, before the portal closed. Chapter 57. Puny Mortal. Is that the best you can do? Jine's voice roared, with a challenging tone. as we exited from the portal, dropping the abomination onto the ground. First few records I contemplated on whether or not I should just let the people deal with it, but having realized that everyone including all of my kids are stronger than him, I decided against it. I took him home. Strength is power after all, and power is influence. Knowing this, I could beat the shit out of the darkness that is within Blonsky's heart. Force him to turn a new leaf, and become a anti-hero. Good start. Some of my actions are like, why? Why would you even think about such a thing? You see, I am a guy of simple tastes. I don't need much to make me happy. I am, although not happy to be taken from my family without my consent, without my notice. I assure you the dude will pay for taking me there, but I am not going to brood about it. Where I am going with here is that I simply am like the Watcher. I find great joy in watching what changes could happen that will happen. However, unlike the Watcher, I interfere, though most of the time, it was unwillingly, as things seem to just happen. Why did you bring that beast here, Dad? Zelera asked flatly. Tina looked at it with curiosity, even with a ting of disgust as she saw how ugly the beast was. In person. Gohan was about to add, but we all noticed something happen. Although I knew about this, the others didn't. The abomination slowly changed back to its human form. So, the beast is nothing but a simple human. Hela said, a raised eyebrow. I nodded. One of Ross's test subjects. I explained, though I can say with utmost confidence that he took Ross's test willingly. Unless this is some sort of AU. Hela nodded. Let me guess, Zelera said flatly. Power? I nodded. Yup, hit the nail on the head. Figures. Bang asterisk bang asterisk bang. Thor duck. Sif's voice roared. Asterisk boom asterisk bang asterisk boom. God of thunder, ha! More like the god of wimps. This sudden roar awoke the human. Blonsky with a start. His eyes quickly snapped open. He quickly jumped to his feet, and in a military stance, eyes darting around the room. Where the hell am I? You are in my house, I said. He glanced to me the moment his eyes met mine. A flash of recognition ran across them. He nodded. He slowly got up and started to the door. Where are you going? Tina asked curiously. None of your damned business, Blonsky said in reply. He decided to ignore the group and continue his walk to the door. That was a mistake. He suddenly found himself pinned to the wall, blades piercing his skin from the front to the back of his arms. The speed of the blades caused him to be flung to the wall and pinned to the wall. Blonsky's neck snapped to where they were thrown to see Hela looking at him like he was an ant. Who do you think you are, mortal? She said coldly. Talking to my daughter like that? Blonsky didn't say anything, he just smirked. You're one of those bitches, he said lowly. Noise. He slowly transformed once again into the beast he once was, and gave off another roar. But no one was intimidated. No one. The abomination smirked cruelly. Let's play. Then I shall pay that blondie his bitch, and She-Hulk, and make them pay for what they have done to me, he growled lowly. Before he could continue, he was grabbed by the ankle and slammed repeatedly left and right. With each impact, craters formed before it grew deeper and deeper with each slam. 5 times she slammed him repeatedly onto the ground before she hoisted him up in the air. The abomination groaned pitifully in pain. Hela gave one look at his pitiful appearance before she scoffed and slammed him on the ground once again, twice before kicking it into a wall. The building almost crumbled, but I fixed it via magic. She crossed her arms and leaned into me. Puny mortal. Chapter 58. In between. Wow. Tina snickered. That was funny. Gohan shot Tina a look. What? He acted all high and mighty, and then got destroyed by Mother easily. Tina shrugged her shoulders. I thought it was funny. Zelera rolled her eyes. His power wasn't strong at all. She said flatly, Mother could knock him out, with one finger if she chose to. The abomination. Gohan said, his eyes trailing back to the TV. That's what the people called him now. His eyes traveled back to the abomination, then back to me. He looked at me with a confused look. Hey Dad, why didn't you give them to the police? I shrugged. I was curious about him. Some people might ask, why the fuck am I doing this right now? Why waste your time on changing the abomination's fate? Let me ask you this question. Does every single action I make have to have such a personal reason for it? Can the reason just simply be because I want to? It's fun to see how things play out when you directly interfere and change things. If Vegeta could change, I have a feeling so can Blonsky. But Blonsky needs to get his ass beat a couple more times to get him to take on an anti-hero path. The hero path is so unrealistic right now for that guy, is not even funny, maybe in the future. So, with the abomination, hell yeah, I am not letting him wrinkle in a misprision. I'ma see what I can do with his life, see what changes I can create from this change. It'll seem very interesting from afar. Ha, Destiny and fate probably hate my guts. Oh no, child, we are actually quite curious about you. Very curious indeed, a voice came in a slow whisper. I glanced around, with a raised eyebrow before I shook my head, having guessed that was most likely the norms of this universe. Jine came back carrying 2 Asgardians over her both of her shoulders. I smirked at her. You got that out of your system? No, she said in a deadpan tone. But they'll do it for now. I chuckled as she dropped them off before she walked over to me. She gazed at the abomination with a curious look. You brought it here? I nodded. She raised at her foot, and did the same thing she did to Thor. She kicked him in the ribs. Blonsky awoke with a start. Fuck! He hissed. What the hell are you? Something you don't want to mess with, ugly. Jine said with a smirk. You on the floor. I'm guessing my mom kicked your sorry butt. Blonsky slowly got up but his legs buckled as he stumbled. He fell right back down to the ground. Pathetic. Hela snorted. I don't know why you waste your time over such a weakling cockroach. Just curious is all. I said with a shrug. I see potential in him. She scoffed. Blonsky decided to remain silent. As he gazed at the entirety of the room, his eyes immediately landed at Thor and Sif, those figures that were unconscious. He fought those too. He admits, they are strong, but there ain't no way in hell that a fucking kid was able to do that to the princess and his bitch. Jine sat them to the side, and leaned against the wall, crossing her arms, much like her mother. Nobody asked the obvious question, because one good reason why nobody hounds us is simply because I placed a spell to prevent tracking. So, even if Ross and his government finds out about this, no one will remember this. Why? Well, I have the Abomination here, so they would most likely want it back. Everybody can handle them easily, so it won't matter anyway. He decided, he'll play by their rules for now. And when they least expect it, he'd attack. Unfortunately for him. I know that there is more to a warrior than using your eyes and moving your fists. 5 full senses and magic. Magic spells all around me, and my children to protect myself and my own children from harm. So even when they are asleep, even when their guard is down, magic spells will go off, and that person would get hit by a dozen magic spells. Overkill? Maybe, but I was a bit paranoid at that time, because of course, this is Marvel. So I had to be safe. Rest assured though, I made sure my family could have the power to protect and defend themselves. Blonsky really has no chance, but it should be amusing to watch him try and fail, to see his reaction when he does. Chapter 59. Join or Die. The Abomination slowly turned to a human once again, which is probably going to be a reoccurring theme here, but it doesn't matter to me. Well, if you need anything. I'm gonna go play Naruto Ninja Storm. Jine said as she left. Gohan smiled. I might join you, he said as he followed her to her own room. I, Hela, Tina and Zelera just stared at the Abomination with slight interest. Tina raised her hand. Zelera looked at her curiously. She shrugged. She looked at Hela. Hela of course nodded her head, seemingly interesting enough. Zelera looked at the Abomination. The Abomination looked even more pathetic than before. A ball of ki formed into her hand. She outstretched her hand and she fired a blast at the limp corpse. Asterisk bang. Oh, fucking shit, my fucking head. Blonsky roared out as he jumped to his feet, knees buckling before his knees impacted the ground. Zelera shot him a blank look. What a drama queen. Hela snorted. Even her husband, who has faced such pain before, isn't that loud. He merely takes it like a man, and deals with it. This mortal truly is pathetic. He finally got a chance to look up for a second time, and see. Though his eyes looked at Hela in fear, as he remembered how she seemed to handle him in that 4 moments ago with ease. Silence. As the 4 of us stared at him in bottom. What do you want from me? He whispered. You going to kill me? Or torture you? Is it too much to ask for both? Hela said, smirking cruelly. Blonsky flinched, but he was turned on. Hela was a beautiful and strong woman who can apparently match him in strength. Especially when he was in that form. The perfect woman. Blonsky, I said. He turned to me. She's taken. My eyes flashed golden for a split second, and a stern expression appeared on my face. Blonsky flinched slightly. The show of power was not someone that stood behind the backs and flaunted over their power. This was someone whose confidence radiated over the power that the forged for their own, on their own. Hela smiled fondly at him. I love it when you get all possessive. With me, she whispered to me seductively, causing me to shudder in pleasure. Blonsky glanced between them, and saw the love they had towards each other. It was so strong that even he felt it. It almost made him want to vomit. But he also felt slightly jealous. But he put that aside. She was lost to him anyway, so he didn't care for him. Andrew Parker, co-CEO of YouTube. Many rumors were told about him. When he had to research or learn about that person in the military. Nobody told him he had powers. He didn't know, nor he cared what to feel about it. But one thing was for sure. He was not going back there. And there is something that Andrew wants. Otherwise, why else would he bring him here? What do you want from me? He asked. I tilted my head. What do I want from you? I asked him curiously. He nodded. No, I think you got the question wrong. It's what do you want for yourself? Asterisk you, got to be kidding me. Jine's voice roared, every single time. How do you keep beating me? I was Madara and you were Kiba. Tina walked away to go join them. Zellara followed him. Don't play that bullshit with me, Parker. Blonsky retorted angrily, what do you want with me? No bullshit. I'm not spouting any bullshit. I said, it's just hard for you to believe. But I see potential in you. Potential wasted as a pawn for a man's idiocy. Blonsky looked at me with a blank expression on his face. I could tell what he is thinking. But he isn't really showing any emotion at this point. Or you can join us. I said. No chance in hell. Blonsky said, crossed his arms. Then you will die. Hela said simply. I will kill you myself. She summoned a blade on cue and just stared at him like she was staring into his soul. Blonsky frowned. So, either join you or die? He slowly began to smirk. Not much of a choice now, is it? You can die. I said, that's always a choice, no matter how dark it is. Blonsky chuckled. I think I might like you. He looked at me in the eye. If I do join you, what's in it for me? A blade suddenly stabbed to the side mere inches from his head. You get to live. Hela smiled cruelly. It is as you said. Follow my husband's orders or die, by my hands. Blonsky frowned. Decisions. Decisions. Chapter 60. Edited. Here comes the spider. I hate you. Blonsky growled. He was on the ground, legs spiraled. I stood above him reading a book. You are really easy to anger. I noted. You should work on that. Some of you might be confused as to what is happening right now. Let's do a recount here. I and Hela decided to give Blonsky a chance. Join us or die. By die, I was saying lay rotten in the cell for the rest of his life. Or he could join me. Unfortunately, while he did accept, he then attacked me seconds later. Not very bright is he. Unfortunately for him, I wasn't as weak as he'd hope. I dragged him, kicked his ass without even looking at him. I even conjured a book to start reading, dismissing him completely, which only caused him to get angrier. I dragged him outside. A one-sided beatdown later. And here we are. Fuck you. Blonsky hissed in pain. You son of a bitch. Sorry, not into dudes. I said with a grin, but I am sure I could give Tony a call. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. Fuck you too. A voice said from the skies, as a loud clang made its way to the ground. A pure silver amour that I instantly recognize as Iron Man armor Mark II. The second he landed, his face mask opened, revealing himself as Tony Stark. Tony, good to see you. I said with a nod. I saw the press conference the other day. You love to troll people, don't you? Tony grinned. Yeah, always such fun. He looked at the downed Blonsky. So what's Frankenstein's deal? Why'd you take him to your house instead of putting him in a jail cell? I snorted. That is for me to know. And for you to go find out on your own, I don't care. I said with a shrug. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow. What are you doing here? How are you here anyway? He smirked. I have my ways. He said with a smug grin, before the smug grin faded shortly after. He looked down. After you saved me, I realized something. Once everything was settled, I looked down to my suit, looked at my suit as I analyzed it, and I realized that there were so many flaws within it. So many ways which could cause things to go the wrong way, causing me to end up dead. I wanted to personally thank you for saving my life. No problem. Just don't lose who you are. I said with a smile. Tony nodded. Is that all you wanted to ask of me? Tony nodded. Yeah, for now. Again, thanks for everything. Tony winked at Hela. Before his face mask covered his face, he ignited his thrusters on his hands and feet, tilted his head upwards and took off into the sky. I rolled my eyes. Typical Tony. I raised my hand and blocked a punch from Blonsky. Sneak attacks won't work on me. I said with a grin, sorry, but I am far too evolved from those to ever hurt me. And if you want to do it right. On cue, Hela appeared out of nowhere in front of him and kneed him in the balls. Asterisk crack. His eyes widened and let out a girlish squeal of pain. Right before I dropped, kicked him back to the ground, knocking him out cold. Know your place, she snarled coldly. I smiled at her, ignoring the slight cringe. I do not know what Hela's deal is with kicking people in the dick, but it does not make me feel comfortable. Almost sorry for him, almost. I suddenly felt my phone ring. I tilted my head curiously before I answered it. Well, I can't say I was expecting this. I said to the phone. How are you doing, Peter? There was a pause. I could tell he was nervous, just from hearing him speak. I need your help. Chapter 61. A different spider. I narrowed my eyes. I'll be there in just a moment. Wait, Don Dash. I hung up on him. Hela raised an eyebrow. Something wrong with little Peter, darling? Yup. I said, so many things had happened at the same time. I was just taking everything in. First Tony Stark and now a potential Spider-Man. This is certainly going to get very interesting very soon. I'll be right back. My eyes traveled to the humiliated and now resigned Blonsky. Keep him in check now, will you? Hela nodded and smirked cruelly at Blonsky as an orange portal appeared. I stepped through it to my mom's house only to blink. Peter's power level, it gotten unnaturally higher. Where is he? I looked around and spotted his key signature. But he himself wasn't visible. A.H. A voice shrieked. Followed I turned my head only to be blinded by a dozen bolts of electricity coming at me all at once. It made no effect once it was impacted. But I could feel a slight sting. I looked towards Peter with a curious and interesting look on my face. Oh, hey Andrew. Peter's nervous voice spoke from nothing. Hey? I said with a grin, already seeing some of Miles Morales' power to the boot. Since when did you learn how to turn invisible? I asked curiously, and shoot lightning from. I hope it's your hands. Magic? I chuckled and closed my eyes. True, magic can make you do that too. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Suddenly I vanished from Peter's eyesight. I looked at him with a small smirk on my face. As he blinked up in shock, I reappeared and raised my own hand, concentrating on a specific element, lightning magic. My hand cackled with lightning before it shaped into a blade. Peter's eyes widened. That's... I could tell that it is not from magic. Something has enhanced you, and made you more powerful than before. Peter closed his eyes and he sighed. You're right, it's not magic. I got bit by a radioactive spider at an Oscorp field trip yesterday. Radioactive spider, huh? I said with a smile. That explains everything. He blinked. What? I thought you'd think I was crazy. Peter sighed, scratching the back of his head. No. You're not crazy, I said. It actually makes perfect sense. Peter stared at me. I want you to shoot me with that bioelectricity again, I said as my smile grew. Hit me as hard as you can. Peter looked down. I would if I could, but I can't. Oh, and why is that? I asked with a raised eyebrow slash. Peter sighed. I just don't know. He suddenly appeared within my sight. I grinned at him. I could see him a lot more clearly now. He clearly has buffed up. Before that, though he did have some muscle, it was more of a swimmer build. Now though, he was buff, not Goku buff but Vegeta buff, which was still buff nonetheless. Aichi had grown taller too. Before he went up to my waist. Now he went up to my chest. I can see you now. I noted. He looked down on himself curiously before looking back at me. That's good. Remember that feeling? He nodded to me, and got in a stance. The lightning blade was still in my hand. I looked at him. Remember that feeling you had now and before, and do it again. He nodded before he closed his eyes and concentrated, before he opened them and slumped. I can't. Yes you can. I said, you are thinking down on yourself again, Peter. Just remember the feeling, and let it go. Peter closed his eyes once again. Remember, Peter, patience is a virtue. I smiled at him. Concentrate on that feeling, find it, and set it free. Let it all out. A moment has passed, nothing came, followed by another, then another, before eventually, his eyes snapped open cackling with electricity. Followed shortly was his arms. His arms glowed blue. Peter thrusted them out, letting loose a mighty scream. Aya! Asterisk bang. Asterisk zzz. One giant blast of electricity erupted from the palms of Peter's hands. I smirked as I lunged at the blast, meeting it Hedon. Raikiri. Asterisk she Hirik. Asterisk bang. H holy shit. Peter shouted, jumping back, clearly not expecting this, but at the same time, he was in total shock and awe at what he saw. That was so badass. But wait a minute. He recognized that move. That was Kakashi's ultimate move, from Naruto. Peter shouted, excitement brimming in his tone. I chuckled as the blade vanished from my hand. You have got to teach me. Peter practically shouted with stars in his eyes. You are a Naruto fan, are you not? I asked. You can learn it yourself. Magic is although different than chakra, you can still take inspiration from certain techniques. So, I can learn those cool jutsus like that shadow clone jutsu and sage mode? I chuckled. With the right imagination, anything is possible, he smiled at him. But right now I'll help you learn how to use your powers at will. And see what other changes you might have in store. Chapter 62. Training the Spider. Before we begin, I said, there is something on your face. Something on my WH. Peter's eyes widened. Before he sidestepped one of my punches, he punched me in the face. But it did absolutely nothing. Instead of feeling hurt, he didn't feel a thing. I grabbed him by the waist and flung him off me. Much to my surprise, and slight joy as a Spider-Man Toby fan when Peter flung. A huge web similar to that of a spider stretched out of his wrist and was connected to my hand while he was flung. He landed on the side of the building. His gaze widened at the spider web. Wow, that's cool, Peter said. I nodded to him and smirked. Spider sense and biowebs, that is cool, but can it come out of somewhere else? Peter tilted his head curiously. Before his eyes widened in realization, he turned his back to face me and squatted. My expression shifted into a deadpan as I heard him grunt. Not literally, you fool. My eyes widened in surprise when literal webs shot out of his ass. Oh fuck no. I raised my hand and a translucent energy barrier appeared in front of me, blocking the attack. I stared at Peter as also just stared at what he just did with wide eyes. Kid, never do that again, I said slowly. I meant for that only as a joke. I know, Peter said. I just wanted to see if I could do it. Highly disturbing but cool at the same time. No. Just no, I replied flatly. I raised my arm to my back and unsheathed my power pole. Come at me. With your webs on anywhere else, but understand. You can cuss around me, you know. Peter grumbled, annoyed. I'm not a kid. Yes you are, I said flatly. Madam Web, what were you thinking? Who? Peter tilted his head as he looked around. I shook my head. Nothing that concerns you, kid. Meanwhile, in a space very far away, a feminine blind grandma-looking figure, who was despite her old age quite the beauty. She giggled at my statement. Just wanted to try something different, child. It was quite humorous, though, you have to admit. I unsheathed my power pole. I want you to attack me, as hard as you can. Peter got into a stance, and what made me tilt my head was different. His stance, I mean. It was more like a spider than before. Tobey Maguire's stance in the Spider-Man movies. When you are a Spider-Man fan, you know of these things the moment you look at it. So the spider changed more than just his abilities. I thought curiously. Power pole extend. I thought. The staff glowed before it shot off like lightning towards Peter, whose spider sense went off, causing him to dodge the attack. I smirked at him as I retracted my staff and lunged at him with controlled speed. Peter let out a painful cry as my punch landed on his face, but since it was a controlled one, it didn't knock him out instantly. He merely fell to his knee with his other hand catching his fall. He placed a hand on his cheek and rubbed it. That was too hard. It was controlled, I said flatly. Use your spider sense. It warns you of incoming danger. So, we're calling it that? Peter asked. That makes sense. Close your eyes and focus, I said with a stern look. Focus on that tingling feeling in your head seconds before I attack, and answer to it. Peter did what was told and closed his eyes. That's when I began my attack at a controlled pace as a test. As if he saw my attack, Peter sidestepped. I twisted my body for a right kick, which he bent his back to a point where his back was facing inches from the ground. I was impressed. His reaction time increased exponentially from before. I clicked my fingers together and a flash of orange shot through the room, strengthening the walls. So similar to Ultra Instinct, but not. I muttered, Spider Sense is truly an interesting thing, but let's see where its limits stand, and then see if we can break those limits. I raised my hands. 2 balls of ki formed in my hands. I smiled excitedly. Let's kick this up a notch. Chapter 63. Testing the Spider. While I was training Peter, Hela was sitting in her chair calmly sipping on her tea. Beside her, Blonsky was on the floor panting, his body covered in cuts and bruises. He was broken as he looked at her with a mixture of both murder and fear in his eyes. Oh, she made sure he behaved all right. She may not be like she once was, but that doesn't mean she doesn't enjoy torturing the ones who deserve it. She gazed at Blonsky. A tiny smirk made its way towards her face as she said in a humorous tone of voice. So you still think that my power is but a fluke? She asked. Blonsky said nothing. He couldn't say anything. You fucking slut, Blonsky said through gritted teeth. I am a slut to my beloved, Hela said with a causal shrug of her shoulders, not denying that fact. It's been like this for a while. But recently Blonsky had just laid there defeated and silent, so she was kind of surprised that he spoke. Pathetic. I don't know what my husband saw in you, Hela said with a neutral expression, before she looked up and took another sip of her tea. Oh, come on again. I was Kyuga and you were Sakura. How do I lose to Sakura? Maybe you're just trash. Gohan's voice replied nonchalantly. Hela chuckled. Can I have a go? Tina's voice asked. Go on ahead, Jine's voice growled angrily. This game is trash anyway. Weren't you just saying that the game was awesome a few moments ago? Zelera asked flatly. I changed my mind. Or maybe you're just trash? Gohan's voice replied smugly. Shut up, Gohan. There was some footsteps, and Jine was revealed in all of her frustrated glory. Hela looked at her with a raised eyebrow, before she took another sip of her tea, completely ignoring the elephant in the room. Blonsky. Where is Dad? Jine asked. I am ready for some more training. He went out. Hela replied, your cousin needed some help so he went out to help him. And he couldn't call on his own parents? Jine asked, her expression shifting to an annoyance. Don't get her wrong, she likes Peter, but she is a bit annoyed at him right now, for obvious reasons. Hela shrugged. Jine grunted, fine. She trailed off as her eyes landed on Blonsky. He didn't even look at her, he just looked to the ground defeated. Hey Mom, her eyes never leaving Blonsky's broken form. You mind if I? Hela smiled. Your father wouldn't really agree with what you're doing. He is already dead. Not in a literal sense, but... What does that matter? Jine flinched, and she looked down at him. Yes, she wasn't a bully. But maybe she could help him in a way. Her mother seems to be way too over the top, and her father seems to be way too nice. But maybe she can be a mix between those two. I promise I won't hurt him too much. Jine said with a small smile, I just want to understand what father saw in him, and maybe bring it out. Hela stared at her for a long moment, before she sighed. Just like your father. Hela smiled fondly. Jine scratched the back of her head. A slight blush formed on her face before she took Blonsky and threw him over his shoulders like a pack of potatoes and entered the mirror world. How does she know of this? His father told her, of course. It's where they train without causing too much chaos in the real world. I promise it won't hurt. Jine said, too much. After what she did. Blonsky uttered slowly. I doubt you. A child can do anything that could remotely faze me. As Jine heard this, she froze. Before a smile came on her face. Blonsky recognized that smile. It is the same type of smile that bitch had when she was torturing him. Oh, Frankenstein. She loved the name Tony Stark had for him. Jine was so going to steal it as her own. You're so going to regret those words. Indeed he was. For a child's mind is different from an adult, so is Jine's mind different from Hela's. Blonsky felt a slow shiver crawl up his spine. Meanwhile, with I and Peter, I was standing in my Ikari form. In my Xeno Goku outfit, while I made Peter a suit that was a mixture of Spider-Man PS4. And since it was night time, I made his suit black and gold, like No Way Home's version. He had no web shooters, but he did have little slots that were invisible to the eye of any human or even immortal. Go web, fly. Up in a way web. I stared at him flatly as he continued to make random signs with his wrist. Shazam! Go web go! I continued to stare at him flatly as he continued to do this for at least a minute. Before he brought his hand down to think. He raised his hand in a proper gang sign, and this time he actually fired. A web shot out of his wrist and impacted something random high in the sky. There, he said. He glanced at me and I nodded my head in approval. He glanced down at the streets, before he looked at the billboard across from him. The image of a beautiful lady eating a small donut glazed with strawberry frosting and sprinkles. That made me want to get a donut. Unlike the movies, this Peter was not at all nervous. He gave me a two-fingered salute and winked at me before he jumped off. Ho-hoo! Chapter 64. Spider-Man Debut. Spider closed his eyes, trusting his spider sense before he spread his hands out and thrusted his hands at the building. He pulled himself upwards, doing a flip before landing on top of the billboard, then jumping off in a free fall. Enjoying yourself, Spider-Man? I asked with a smirk, as I easily flew beside him. This is awesome, Peter said with a smirk, before it suddenly hit him. His eyes widened in realization before he slammed face first into the pole, knocking the pole over. Oh man, that's funny slash. I snickered. I had my phone instantly in one of my hands to record while the other hand quickly grabbed the pole before slamming it back to the ground, creating a small hole. I used a bit of magic to fix the cracks. Mend was very useful, and although it was a bitch to learn, I was glad I was able to learn it. The pain is worth the trouble I had when learning it. That and the ability to use Tyne's clone technique without taking half of my energy. It took a while, but I was able to figure it out, one of my most useful skills. I used it to handle important tasks. I quickly set the pole upright and slammed it into the ground. Ow! Peter groaned. He looked up, his eyes widened under his mask as he stared at the phone in my hands. What the fuck are you dash? Language. I chided. And I am thinking about showing the girls. I reacted and dodged a web and looked back at Peter, who had his gang sign hand up and pointed at me. Don't even think about it. I smirked at him. And what are you going to do about it? I asked in a challenging tone. I could feel the glare he had behind the mask. Someone help MMMNPH. Both of our eyes widened before I smirked. All right, kid, I said with a smile. This is going to be your first test to control the strength. You mean fighting criminals? Peter asked. I nodded. Yes, fighting criminals and trying not to kill them in the process. I said with a smile, that was what Master Walker taught me, when I was training in Australia. Master Walker. Peter trailed off, before his eyes widened in shock. Why? You're Blast. The world-famous hero that has been kicking the criminals' asses left and right across the world, but you vanished you. Holy shit, you're Blast. I nodded. Some of you might be confused, but there was a time where I was training my powers to control my Akari form strength, so I went around the world beating up criminals left and right, as a test of my strength. But I vanished for a decade never to return again, and the crime rate around the world went back up. I still remained a legend that frightened the criminals to this day. I was like a Marvel version of Batman in way. It was cool. Yes, they know about this too. I glanced at the distance. We should hurry up before we are too late, I said with a flat tone in my voice. Right? Peter muttered sheepishly. He raised his hand in another deadpan expression before he raised his hand in a gang sign and fired a web. The two of us flew and swung towards the source. I landed on a wall as Peter made impact on another. I sat down and closed my eyes in a meditative position as Peter saw the girl grabbed in a headlock while the dude ripped her clothes off. Peter jumped up and Spartan kicked the guy to the wall. Eric! The guy in the headlock roared, before he threw the girl onto the ground, before he rushed at Peter. Peter shot a web at the girl and grabbed her by the waist. He bent his head back and dodged the punch before he grabbed him by the ankle and swung him towards the other guy. Eric? Eric was gone. Peter raised both his hands and fired two webs at the guy he had just flung. Before he crashed into the side of the building and flung the guy towards him right before he kneed him in the balls, there was a loud sickening crack before the dude fell into his knees. He suddenly felt his tingling senses again, immediately backflipped just as a truck came from behind him. Holy shit. He opened the door and jumped out just in time for the truck to hit the wall, leaving him injured as the truck was crushed. Peter realized that this was the same dude from before. Eric was what his name was. Peter was still doing this with the girl his age. She was quite the beauty too, and she was basically frozen from fear. Peter noticed that the dude whose balls he kneed was crawling away, but he just grabbed him by the throat, walked to the other dude, and grabbed him by the throat as well before he slammed the two heads together, knocking him out. Peter rolled his arms. That was too easy, he said with a smirk under his mask before he webbed him up. He was about to swing away, but... Wait! A voice cried out. He turned and saw that it was the girl his age. Since she was not decent, he decided to look up to her face, but it was hard because she was hot. Who are you? Peter stared at her for a second, but then my words played in his mind for a long moment. Spider-Man, he eventually responded. He winked at her before he shot up at the sky. My eyes snapped open as I came to him. What? No remarks, no quips and jokes? I asked, so unlike you. Yeah, I was caught in the moment, Peter said, scratching the back of his head. Still good job. You managed to get a fan, Spider-Man. I smirked. In the form of Felicia Hardy. Spider-Man tilted his head. How do you know her name? Her mother. I said with a shudder. Let's not talk about that. Come on, let's get back home, I said with a grin. You're a good kid. He sighed as we both jumped up and flew away. Meanwhile, back with the now named Felicia Hardy. Spider-Man. She whispered. Spider-Man. Her smile turned into a smirk as her eyes gained a determined glint in them. We will see each other again. Chapter 65. Humility. Jine shot him through the mirror portal. Get up, Frankenstein, this is going to be quick. Blonsky grunted and he himself remained on the ground. Jine scowled. Okay. Seriously enough, so you got your butt kicked by a girl. Big deal. Jine grabbed him by the shoulders and forced himself up. You want to know something my father taught me? She asked. There will always be someone stronger than you, and some things even stronger when you at least expect it. Blonsky scoffed at her words, but she remained neutral. You know what you are right now, Frankenstein. Would you stop calling me that? Blonsky hissed, causing Jine to raise an eyebrow. Or what? Blonsky growled as his skin started to morph, changed to his beast form. The Abomination once again, he roared as he threw a punch towards J. Jine grabbed the punch and reflected it back, punching the Abomination in the face, sending him crashing through several buildings in the mirror dimension. Jine didn't technically know how to control it. Jine grabbed the Abomination by the elbow and started to punch him repeatedly in the face. First punch broke his nose, then his face, then his power. Why are you hitting yourself? She laughed. Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? She crashed into the ground. Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? This sent them spiraling into the ground. But Jine was on top of him. She got up off of him. He growled and lunged at her, but Jine, with her strength as a hybrid Saiyan, grabbed a huge 3-story building and slammed it into him. Jine floated off of the ground with her arms crossed, waiting for him to come out. Nothing. Hello. Nothing. Oh boy. She groaned, before her head perked up as a fist shot itself out of the rubble. Rubble was pushed aside as the abomination climbed itself out, though he looked sluggish. Okay. Jine saw the resilience that the abomination had when getting off. She had a feeling she saw what her father had seen, but she still needed some time, right now. She needed another outfit. This guy was boring. You're clearly not as strong as I thought you were, so I'm going to go find Gohan. She grabbed the abomination and struck him unconscious before exiting the mirror dimension. I still can't believe that you're blast. Peter said with a deadpan tone, walking in. And he vanished for a decade. You were just here? Living a life with your family. Our family. Yes. I nodded my head with a smile. Yes, I was, but that was a time where I was still young and I had just achieved my form a month ago with training. I was there with Master Walker trying to help me control my strength. Mr. Walker. Peter thought carefully and then remembered something. Isn't that the dude that tried to replace Captain America? I nodded. I smiled. Yeah? I said with a grin. But he's retired now. How was he? Peter asked. In comparison to Captain America, I mean. I don't know, I've never met him. I said with a slight smile. But I do know that he tried his best to be like him. After some advice from me, he started to not be him but himself. Peter tilted his head, but I remained silent. The two of us swung/flew through the air. You're doing pretty well with those swings. I complimented, glancing at him through the corner of my eyes. Thanks. He said. Can't we just portal our way home, he asked. I shrugged. Well, yeah. But what training will that be? You'll for now on be swinging to my house from now on? Swinging from? Wait, why are we going to your house? Mom and Dad are coming to visit. I said with a deadpan expression. I sense them near my house, so that's where we are going. Oh, was all Peter said as they both swung/flew away. Chapter 66. Parker Meeting 1. I still can't believe that you're blast. Peter said with an awestruck tone, walking in. And he vanished for a decade. You were just here? Living a life with your family. Our family. Yes. I nodded my head with a smile. Yes, I was, but that was a time when I was still young and I had just achieved my form a month ago with training. I was there with a Master Walker trying to help me control my strength. Mr. Walker. Peter thought carefully and then remembered something. Isn't that the dude that tried to replace Captain America? I nodded. I smiled. Yeah? I said with a grin. But he's retired now. How was he? Peter asked. In comparison to Captain America, I mean. I don't know, I've never met him. I said with a slight smile. But I do know that he tried his best to be like him, but after some advice from me, he started to not be him but himself. Peter tilted his head, but I remained silent. The two of us swung/flew through the air. You're doing pretty well with those swings. I complimented, glancing at him through the corner of my eyes. Thanks. He said. Can't we just portal our way home, he asked. I shrugged. Well, yeah. But what training will that be? You'll for now on be swinging to my house from now on? Swinging from? Wait, why are we going to your house? Mom and Dad are coming to visit. I said with a deadpan expression. I sense them near my house, so that's where we are going. Oh, was all Peter said as they both swung/flew away. The two of us landed on the roof of our house. I was about to open the portal home when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Peter looking more nervous than before. What's up, Peter? I asked. Do you think that Aunt May and Uncle Ben should see me like this? Peter asked nervously. I shook my head. I understand your concerns, but you have nothing to worry about. Aunt May and Uncle Ben can take care of themselves. But if you don't tell them your secret, then that means you don't trust them, I told him plainly, causing him to flinch. Peter, I understand why you want to keep this hidden, but please understand that this was the reason why I wanted them to become stronger myself. My mom wanted to become strong because she didn't want to be helpless anymore. Considering everything that I went through when I went beast mode. Peter's eyes widened in realization. You mean that other form that you have? The one where your eyes turn yellow and your hair spikes up? I shook my head. No. That is a much higher level. With a twitch of my fingers, the portal opened up, and the two of us appeared face to face with the rest of the family, Mom and Dad included. Blonsky's head was against the wall, unconscious. May smiled at us. Hello, dear eye. Her eyes landed on Peter's outfit. Her expression changed into a deadpan look. Really? She asked. You should be proud of him, Mom. I said with a grin. He saved a girl from being raped. Chapter 67. Parker Meeting 2. Okay. I said calmly. This isn't what it looks like. Oh, I believe it is. May said flatly. You are clearly teaching your cousin on how to become a vigilante. Yes. I nodded my head. I have no regrets. No. Regrets? May asked incredulously. You have no regrets on teaching a young child on how to be a vigilante, right? May, Andrew was younger than him when he started, Ben said with a blank expression. Yes. But he was not an alien that could turn into a great ape and crush the entirety of the human race with nothing but his pinky. May deadpanned back. Even then I was against it, but he insisted. Hela took a sip of tea as she watched unamused. Look, I was trying to control my power. I said with a sigh. I didn't want to lash out and punch a person only for the said punch to accidentally go through their stomach. That would have been so hot to see, Hela said looking at me with a half-lidded gaze. I shot her a look. Later. I glanced back and sighed. It worked out well, didn't it though? A lot of people were safe because of me. May sighed, I suppose. But why does Peter need to go through the same thing? Why can't he just train like everyone else? Peter got bit by a radioactive spider. Uncle Ben's eyes widened. His eyes immediately glanced to Peter, who looked nervous at the sudden attention. It enhanced not only his powers but his senses. What exactly were his symptoms? Uncle Ben asked cautiously. I can walk on pretty much anything. Peter said, I can shoot webs from my body. Can you shoot it out your butt? Zelera asked. Peter glanced to me nervously. It was embarrassing and he didn't want to share it like that. He can. I said with a neutral tone. That is so interesting. Tina smirked, leaning her head towards Peter. That's gross. Zelera said flatly while nodding her head. Cool, but gross. Peter took a step back and shot me a betrayed look. I rolled my eyes. Oh, relax. They're just interested. The only person who would make a big deal out of it is Jine. That's still not something I'd want to tell anyone. Peter growled. It is embarrassing. Anything else? Ben asked. I nodded. He can turn invisible and manipulate lightning to a certain extent. I explained. Why are you so interested in this anyway? Uncle Ben sighed. Because his father was the one who told me what happened before he died. And he asked me if he could send Peter to them if things do not go well. I see. I muttered. Peter bowed his head. He wasn't completely sure what happened, but he got the basics of what happened, and why his parents had to leave. I personally didn't tell him the whole truth, but I told him the truth. Why? Because I didn't want him to turn evil years later, thinking that we lied to him about his parents. Honestly, it might be far-fetched, but the Marvel Universe is full of far-fetched crazy shit. Suddenly there was a sound of glass shattering, as Gohan came from the mirror dimension, carrying Jine bridal style. Both of their clothes were ripped, and blood and bruises all over their body. Hey Dad, hey. His eyes glanced between Mom, Dad, and Peter. Grandma, Grandpa, Uncle Peter. Why are you here? May was used to this being a Saiyan thing, but it still disturbed her seeing her grandchildren hurt like this. He glanced at me. Why are they here? Family get together. I placed my hand on his shoulder, and the edges glowed yellow before it transferred over to Gohan and then Jine. All of their cuts and bruises were healed, and I felt the power increase. He closed his eyes and sighed in relief before he opened them again. Thanks, Dad. No problem, I smiled. Come on and have a seat. Chapter 68. Parker Meeting 3. So. I glanced at Hela. I take it you already told them about Thor and Sif. She shook her head. Well, your father told them. I merely added a few things to clear things up. I nodded. May smiled at her while Ben's expression remained neutral. So, Parker Meeting, let's talk about stuff. I said with a grin. Like Ben said, I had been taking on students. Some of them are like Hela, who is also my student technically. Hela smirked in response. Oh yes, he is my master in the form of fighting among a lot of other things. Ben shuddered, and May and Tina whistled. Zelera, Gohan, and Peter's faces turned red. I did not need to hear about that. Gohan said flatly, what my parents do in the bedroom is not something for their child to hear. I rolled my eyes. Gohan, just accept it. You're going to do the same thing when you get older anyway. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. I am not. Gohan growled. I am not interested in anything, or anyone at this time. There was a cough. Everyone glanced at Tina, who smirked at Gohan. Gohan glared at Tina, as if saying, don't you dare. Tina's smirk grew. So, who's the special lady? I do not have a special lady. Gohan growled, his face heating up. Shut up, Dad. Her name is Felicity Hardy. She said with a smile. Peter froze, and my eyes widened. Hardy? Wouldn't she be, related to Felicia Hardy by any chance? He asked nervously. She is her younger sister. Tina said with a shrug. Why? Why are you smirking at me, Dad? I narrowed my eyes at him. Heh, it's nothing. Just the same woman you've tried to avoid for the last decade and a half seems to somehow find her way back to you, whether it be her or her daughters. Hela raised an eyebrow. Something you'd like to say, dear? I may or may not have a Yandere coming on to me. I said with a shrug. She is hard to get rid of. Not if I kill her. Hela smiled. Easy solution. No one is killing anyone. May raised her voice. This is going to be a normal family reunion. No killing. No fighting. Just normal. I mean, we have an alien and a goddess in the room. Zellara said flatly. +2 sorceress. I am pretty sure the word normal is out of the equation here. And I'll stay quiet now, she muttered as May's glare aimed at her. Ugh, what hit me? Jine groaned as her eyelids slowly fluttered open. Gohan knocked you unconscious, I assume. I smiled at her. Nice of you to come back to the living world, Jine. Jine rolled her eyes. Yeah, I was dreaming of fighting giant man eating zombie things the size of a skyscraper. Everyone raised an eyebrow as I looked on curiously. Attack on Titan? She looked at me curiously. Cool, I'm calling that it. Why, you ask? I might make an anime based off of your dream. I said with a shrug. Oh, she grinned. Cool. She looked around. Where are Goldilocks and his girlfriend? And why are Grandma and Grandpa here? And a hello to you too, Jine. Dad deadpanned at her. Still unconscious. Tina responded with a shrug. And they are here because... She looked at them in confusion as well. Why are you here? Uncle Ben wanted to pay you a visit when he saw you earlier. May answered with a shrug. I thought it was a great idea, so I agreed. Okay. Jine's eyes went to the spandex. So who are you supposed to be? Some type of Spider-Man. Peter cringed. I was going to go for human spider, actually. Jine's eyes widened as she recognized the voice before she started to laugh. Pfta ha 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 ha. It's not that funny. Peter growled, which only made her laugh harder. Peter gave me a pleading look. I shrugged. I told ya. Chapter 69. Parker meeting. Hot and ready. Thor and Sif were the next to awaken. Everyone could hear their groans. Come on, man, have a seat. I said, pointing to the chair next to me. Thor nodded, and he did just that, walking past Jine and slapping her on the back. That was a good battle, he smirked. You truly do have Asgardian blood in your veins. Jine snorted. You wish, Goldilocks. These are my Saiyan genes. It could be both. Sif said, sitting on the opposite side of me. She does indeed have the best of both, Hela smirked. Ben raised an eyebrow as May sighed, remembering a certain incident where he fought a cosmic-level demonling and survived. It wasn't always like this on our side of the family, but with certain incidents, we managed to... Incidents? Jine asked, like the time Dad almost completely destroyed the city? My parents looked at me with both of their eyebrows raised. Peter nodded to himself, as if he expected it too. Knock knock. That must be the pizza. Awesome. Jine cheered. What is the pizza? Meat lovers. I said, with steak, pepperoni and bacon. I made sure to order 50. I paid them good money for it, but it was very expensive. I'll get the door. Jine rushed to the door. So what is this pizza? Thor asked. Hela smiled. You'll soon find out. It's actually quite delicious. I wanted to make it myself, but my husband insists not to. Because your cooking kills suck. I said flatly. Hela pouted. Don't give me that look. I am being honest because I love you. Hi. Can I speak to Andrew? Parker? A girl's voice said. Is he in here? No. You cannot speak to my dad. Jine said flatly. Where is the pizza? Pizza. The girl's voice was confused. What pizza? And Dad? Dad. Everyone looked at me. I sighed and got up before I walked to the door. What's the problem? Where is the pizza? I paid at least $400 for that thing. The girl noticed me and her eyes widened before they grew sparkles. Oh my gosh, you're actually Andrew Parker. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Girl? I snapped her out of her daze with a wave of my hands. Where is the pizza? Oh, here I am? She gave me a half-lidded stare. I can be your pizza baby. Hela frowned, Peter and Gohan blushed. Zellara looked at her flatly. Tina whistled. Thanks but no thanks. I am already married and have kids. I deadpanned at her. Where's the pizza? I ordered it from Hot and Ready. Well. She licked her lips. I'm hot and ready. Zellara snorted as Jine smirked. She got a point there, Dad. She shut up after I gave her a look. I looked at her, so. No pizza? She laughed. I don't know where you got pizza from, but you ordered a girl from Hot and Ready. And well, here I am. Hot and ready. Everybody looked at me flatly. Okay. I wasn't exactly looking on my phone at the time. I said with a sheepish smile, I was kind of busy. Whoa whoa whoa. Jine growled as she barricaded the door. Aw, you're so cute. She started to assault my daughter's cheeks with her fingers. She was forcefully pushed away. Yeah, lady. No, don't touch my cheeks. So strong, do you get that from your big, strong daddy? The girl grinned at her. The way she put emphasis on those last 3 words made Hela narrow her eyes. Jine growled. Lady, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Yeah, no. You ordered me for 24 hours. So I am staying here. The girl tried to force her way into the house, but I blocked the way with my body. She tried to push through me with all her might, but it wouldn't budge. You are strong, Elle. Her fingers trailed along my chest. A blush started to form on her cheeks, so muscly too. I forcefully pushed her away before I slammed the door in her face. Don't worry, baby, she breathed. I'll wait here all night until you're ready for me. I ignored her as well as everybody else's incredulous looks. Guess we are not having pizza today. I could hear the girl's heavy breathing through the door. I ignored that too. I'll be in the kitchen. Chapter 70. Quick question, not a chapter. Chapter 71. Reunion between mothers 1. In the golden halls of Asgard, a powerful figure walked slowly through them with a peaceful smile on her face. It didn't take much to make her happy, honestly, and hearing her son being developed both in the mind and in the heart made her feel happy on the inside. Cockroach. Was it? She thought. Perhaps I should thank him somehow. She made a pause in her step when she felt a presence. A familiar presence, at that. She frowned. What are you doing here, Gaia? She asked, no small amounts of disdain in her voice towards the figure just a few inches in front of her. Your Majesty. You are dismissed. She said, eyes never leaving Gaia's, who smiled nervously. The guards bowed and departed. I'll ask again. Why are you here? Frigga narrowed her eyes. If it is another attempt to get with my husband, I swear to you I da. No, none of that. Gaia sighed. I came to you because I wanted to apologize. Frigga's eyes widened before backed up and got in a defensive stance. Were you really? The Gaia I knew would never do something like that. She paused for a moment. Also, the Gaia I knew would appear to me face to face, not do whatever you just did when entering Asgard. Well, Gaia trailed off, let's just say in order for me to make amends. I thought it would have been better if I did things proper. A couple of moments earlier. Halt, state your business. A couple of guards said as they blocked Gaia's path to Asgard. I am here on behalf of business to seek an audience with the Queen. Gaia stated calmly. They refused. She let out an annoyed sigh. I am sure your queen would be very disappointed if you refused to let me in. I am a very good friend of hers after all. Flashback end. We are not friends. Frigga said through gritted her teeth. Gaia gave her a half-lidded stare. I am trying to be civilized here. You tried to my husband in front of me. Frigga snarled. Gaia raised her eyebrow. Are you sure it looked like he was enjoying my death? Frigga unsheathed a dagger from her sleeve. I'm sorry, okay? Gaia shouted. I'd admit to being in the wrong if you'd just hear me out. You've got 2 minutes. Frigga growled. One last move and I'll punt you out of Asgard myself. Chapter 72, Chapter 73, Chapter 74. Just like old times. I walked down to the kitchen. Cooking something up. It was my mom's famous fettuccine alfredo dishes that she loved to cook so much. I had the chicken, I had the macaroni, and I had the cheese. My hands became a blur as I shredded the cheese in an instant. All of it falls onto a plate. Need some help? A voice asked. I glanced to the right and spot my mother leaning next to the door with her arms crossed, a gentle smile on her face. I shrugged, sure. She walked over to me, gave a gentle kiss to my cheek before she went to where the knives were. She grabbed a knife before she went to the chicken and started to cut pieces off. I grabbed a pot from under the stove, went to the kitchen and started to fill it up with water. I put it on the fire. 5 in total. 2 on each side, and 1 in the center. I put it on the top left side. And lit the stove up. 10 levels on each. I put it on 9. My mother finished cutting the pieces off, before she went to the cabinet, and grabbed 4 bowls. She grabbed the cheese and the chicken and dumped them both in each. At the same time, I reached my hand out for the macaroni, and put it in the water which was now boiling. Reminds me of old times, huh? Mom said with a smile. I closed my eyes and chuckled, as I remembered this exact scene long ago. Dad, the hoe hasn't tea left. Jine's voice shouted. Ignore her. I called back. It's really hard to do that when she is breathing really loud. Jenny called back. It's really annoying. Why don't you call the police? Mom asked. Surely they would deal with something like this. I sighed, because they would only make the situation worse. May quirked an eyebrow. Oh? I rubbed my temples. The last time something like this happened, the police did what we asked. But they ended up being the bigger problems because we were harassed by them as well. Mom frowned. What did they try to get with you two? Well, the girl did. I sighed. The guy tried to get with my wife, but it didn't end up well for him. Mom shook her head. Honestly, do these people not know boundaries? I shrugged. Well, we are more than powerful of dealing with it on our own, but we'd rather not come. Well, I'd rather not come to use it. My wife, on the other hand, let's just say that the dude won't be able to give birth anymore. You know they can sue you, right? May asked. Aren't you worried about that? I got it all on camera. I deadpanned. If they try to sue me, then I will just show the judge a recording of everything that happened then. They broke multiple laws in this video, which is far worse than what we did. Which kicked their asses simply out of self-defense, which failed miserably. Mom blinked before she smirked. Nice? I grabbed the butter, and I grabbed the flour, and I put a little bit in the pot. Before I mixed it slowly. Mom walked to the refrigerator and grabbed the milk carton before she opened it and poured as much as it was needed. I grabbed 3 other pots from below the stove and put that on each of the fire. And did the same while my mother poured the milk in each, before grabbing a mixing spoon and started mixing it slowly until it was mixed well enough. Once the sauce was boiling, I grabbed the cheese and slowly poured it in as my mother mixed it in slowly. From then you could smell the smell of the cheese melting into the sauce. The same was done to each of the pots. Eventually, after continuous mixing, the sauce was complete, as well as the pasta. The pasta was literally overflowing, so I had to pour it in really fast or else it would fall out, not only fast but quickly. Mother put the milk down on the counter before she grabbed the plate and placed it below the pot, as poured equal amounts of pasta in each sauce pot. Some of the pasta dropped onto the plate, but nothing onto the floor. Once that was done, my mother poured the rest that dropped onto the pot onto the sauce pots while I gently put the pot down onto the stove. I went to grab this big-ass bowl. My mother put down the plate before grabbing a stand that could fit the bowl before she went to stir the pasta in the sauce. The stand was about the size of a medium-size mattress, as was the bowl. Once I put the bowl on the stand, I grabbed 2 pots while my mom grabbed the other 2, and we gently poured the pasta into the bowl, filling it up completely. I went to grab a spoon that was a foot taller than the stand itself and began to mix pasta together. Once it was done, we both looked at our work. I glanced to my mother and smirked, just like old times. Mother giggled slightly. Let me prepare the plates. She gave me a peck on the forehead, before she did as she was told. Chapter 75. A reunion between mothers 2. Meanwhile, back on Asgard, Frigga was staring blankly as Gaia just about finished explaining why she was here. And then his children decided that I should start by making amends to the people I had wronged first, before coming here. Frigga frowned. And out of all the people, you came to me first? Gaia sighed. I tried to reconcile with my husband, and I told him the truth of everything. And how did that turn out? Frigga snarked. Gaia closed her eyes painfully. Let's just say, I don't have a husband anymore. Frigga winced. I see. Yeah. Gaia nodded her head. I guess I do deserve that. I cheated him against an uncountable number of people. She shook her head. Anyway, it wasn't just my husband that I tried to reconcile. I tried to reconcile with my family, but they either wanted nothing to do with me, or feared me to the point that they can't even speak properly in my presence. Rubbing her temples, Frigga took a deep breath. This was not how she expected the conversation to turn out. Through the past, she may have hated her because of how she was making moves on with her husband in front of her, but she wasn't heartless. She knows very well the feeling of rejection. And knowing Gaia, and how many relationships she'd been in, not one of them reconciled, that must be bad for her own mentality. It was bad enough for her with just one, who completely ignored all of her advances long before she met Odin. At least you tried. Frigga sighed. She didn't want to do this. But if Kakarot, Andrew had given her a chance, then she guesses she should do the same. After all that Saiyan did for her son, it was the least she could do. Frigga closed her eyes before she took a deep breath. Then she opened them and stared right at Gaia. I forgive you, she said, causing Gaia's eyes to widen in shock at the unexpected response. What? Oh, don't get me wrong, I still don't like you. Frigga glared at her for a moment, before she sighed. However, if Andrew was able to forgive you for all the evil that you had done. There was a pause for a moment before she continued. If Andrew was able to forgive you for all that you have done, then I will just have to trust his judgment. Gaia just stared in stunned silence. It's the least I could do after all. Frigga gave off a gentle smile. For everything that he did for my son. Chapter 76. Intermission. Gaia stared speechless. There were many people that she had fucked with in the past. Many people were trash. Others were not. Though she didn't bother with the people that were, but the people that she tried to make amends with. They didn't give her the time, or the chance. Yes, even the mortals that had no special abilities, Frigga was one of those people she tried to screw over, again, and again. Making her hate her, but even after all of these stuff she admits were wrong due to her student Andrew/Cockroach and Thor's rejection. It was admittedly her student's children that set her off on this path to redemption. Gaia suddenly tensed, as she saw Frigga walk forward with a blank expression on her face. Each moment felt like an eternity, but eventually she was face to face. Frigga closed her eyes, took a deep breath and opened them. In one quick motion that would be unseeable to the eyes of the average mortal, Frigga punched Gaia in the face. Asterisk clap. That clapping sound was heard throughout the halls of Asgard. Then followed by that loud asterisk clapping sound was a thud noise. Gaia was sent to the floor, her hand on her cheek. She looked at Frigga, whose arm was outstretched and hand balled into a fist. Her expression was still blank. I thought you had forgiven me, she asked, still shocked by the sudden action. Frigga smiled wickedly. I may have forgotten you, but that still doesn't mean that I can't pay you back for what you've done. Gaia sighed as she slowly got back up. Fair enough, now that I seech. Frigga launched herself at Gaia, who managed to avoid at the last minute. Since she wasn't on Earth, Gaia's power has severely weakened. That doesn't mean she is weak though, that punch just caught her off guard. Frigga launched herself at Gaia again, but this time, she grabbed her fists. Let's not. Gaia said with a strained smile. Frigga glared at her, before slowly relenting. She crossed her arms over her chest, making it seem bigger. Gaia admits she did sneak a peek. Now that you got what you wanted, leave now, Frigga said. Gaia smiled nervously. Do you want to come with me? Frigga raised an eyebrow. Why would I do that? Gaia shrugged. Well, you wanted to meet Cockroach, right? He's interesting. Frigga mused. Never saw the mortal in person, but he seems to be the interesting sort from what I have heard. Everything he did for my son. Gaia was grateful. By all means, she has more right to call them her sons than she does, because she actually gave a damned enough to raise them. If only she didn't realize this too late. Why don't you meet him in person? Frigga paused for a moment. She was actually going to do that anyway, but she didn't want to make a bad impression of herself from him. So, if Cockroach thinks so highly of her, perhaps this wouldn't be such a bad idea. She looked up at her, and nodded her head. Very well. A couple of moments later, the two of them went to Heimdall. My queen. Lady Gaia. Heimdall did a bow. Heimdall. Frigga said softly. You know why we are here? I do. He gazed down at the endless stars of the night sky. The mortal, Cockroach, or as the Midgardians call him, Andrew. You are here to meet with him. Frigga nodded as Gaia looked at him with curiosity, and no small amounts of interests. Frigga raised an eyebrow. I am? That is not a problem, is it? Cockroach is having a family meeting, Heimdall said. Then maybe it is bad for us to interfere. Frigga said softly. We shall interfere in a later date. Heimdall shook his head. I do not think it would be a problem with Prince Thor and Lady Sif there. However, I do need to warn you about Princess Hela. You may receive some hostility from her. Gaia slowly nodded. I did hear some not so good things from her about you. Frigga sighed as she closed her eyes, before she opened them slowly. I suspected it. Very well then. She glanced at Heimdall. Open the Bifrost to the home of Cockroach. As you wish, Your Majesty. The two of them appeared in front of a humble home. So this is Cockroach's place. Frigga glanced around curiosity. Not what I was expecting. You were expecting a castle? Gaia asked amused. That is not Cockroach's thing as you call it. The two of them walked towards the house and they spotted a random mortal door locked out the door, looking tired and about to faint. She was still breathing heavily against the door. The two looked over at her curiously as they approached. Chapter 77. Intermission 2. Ha, ha, ha. The girl breathed through the door. Both Gaia and Frigga exchanged glances, one amused and the other concerned. Amused because Gaia knows this is a fangirl who most likely got kicked out for being an yandere, as her student calls it, who doesn't know boundaries. And while that may seem like she is a hypocrite, as she has tried to get into his pants before, she was his teacher, and he respected that relationship with her, at least as good friends. Are you all right, mortal? Frigga asked, concerned. She perked her head up and glanced at her or the both of them, in confusion. Who the hell are you two? Frigga was taken aback by the harshness in her tone, as well as the language. Last time she had been on Midgard, Midgardian women were more graceful than this. She is the mother of Andrew's students. Gaia said, students of martial arts Frigga, she clarified at her confusion. I am his teacher, or one of his teachers, Gaia. As in Mother Earth and the Queen of Asgard from Norse and Greek mythology? The girl tilted her head. Gaia smiled. Exactly. She stared at them for a long moment. Of course Andrew would have gorgeous girls in his circle. He is a celebrity after all. But these girls are unnaturally beautiful. Even if one seemingly has wrinkles on her face making her the older woman. It made her feel a little self-conscious. What are you doing here, child? Waiting to be fucked. The girl responded bluntly. Gaia snorted. Child, you do realize he's happily married and has a family, right? And I'm happily ready to ruin it. The girl smirked dangerously. If it's not ruined already, he was the one to order me after all. Oh really? Gaia raised an eyebrow while Frigga frowned. The door was slammed open. Oh my, Frigga whispered, eyes wide. Andrew gave the two a flat look. Why are you conversing with her? Gaia shrugged. I found it amusing, my dear student. Why did you kick her outside like that? She was being an obsessive pervert. I stated flatly. I glanced at Frigga. You must be Frigga. She blushed slightly, something Gaia and I noticed. Gaia smirked. Why yes, I am indeed Frigga. It is a pleasure to meet you, Andrew. While it is surprising to hear you call me that, I don't care if you do. I said to her, unimpressed by her blush, and slapped a hand away from the hot and ready rent a host site that was reaching dangerously close to my dick. She pouted. Pleasure is mine. I nodded my head to her. What are you doing here? She ignored the feeling in her stomach and took a deep breath. I wanted to thank you personally for everything that you have done. Frigga said calmly and bowed her head. The girl snorted. What is this, the 18th center? I threw a peanut at her. It was nothing. I said with a shrug, ignoring the girl. In the contrary, it is rather something. Frigga smiled. My son was not in the right mind at the time. You must be quite the mortal to have my son respect you so much that he decides to change his ways. You should most likely thank my wife. I said with a blank expression. She's the one who changed Thor, not me. Indeed, a voice spoke, causing Frigga gulp slightly. Wrapping her arms around her husband while pressing her body against him was the goddess of death Hela herself. She gave Frigga an unimpressed look. Frigga stiffened. Chapter 78. Family Meeting 1. Gaia and Frigga walked over to where the girl was, who was leaning against the wall. Excuse me, mortal. Frigga asked, gaining the girl's attention. As she perked up at the sound of her voice, she looked up to see a middle-aged woman and a woman that seemed to be in her 40s. Both were drop-dead gorgeous, looking at her with a curious stare. Why are you here? I should be asking you that. The girl snarked. I have been waiting for Mr. Andrew to open his door, but he refuses for some reason. She raised an eyebrow. And, mortal? Never mind that. Gaia smiled good-naturally. How long have you been out here? The girl frowned before she pulled out her phone. She put it back in her pocket. I'd say about an hour. Frigga raised an eyebrow. What did you do to piss him off? Gaia asked, amused. I don't know. She stomped a foot. He ordered me to fuck. And then he rejects me? Ah. Well, I certainly cannot wait to hear the story from him. Gaia raised an eyebrow, as her smile grew. Such vulgar. Frigga said, surprised. I thought mortals were more evolved than this. I opened the door and deadpanned. What are you doing here? You left so suddenly without saying anything. I looked directly at Gaia, not before giving a nod to Frigga. I completely ignored the girl. Oi, don't ignore me. Well, I thought of what you had said. Gaia replied nervously, and you are right. So I decided to fix the first thing that came up to my mind. I raised my eyebrow and I looked at her. Okay. I eventually said with a sigh, so I am happy for you. I looked at the woman next to her, and I immediately recognized her as Queen Frigga. A lot more beautiful and majestic. She gives off that mature old person vibes, but she looks younger than I would think she looks, and she is looking at me with a curious stare. And, is that blush on her cheeks? What? Ah. You must be. Should I call you Cockroach or? Frigga hesitated. That is my Saiyan name. I said with a nod. You may call me that or Andrew. It doesn't matter to me. Well then, Andrew. Frigga said and then bowed. I have heard stories of what you have done. You have changed the heart of the goddess of death, and you have changed the heart of my son. She looked directly into my eyes. I wanted to thank you. For now. You have changed their destiny. I nodded. It was my pleasure. I said with a nod. And you have my respect. I have heard things from you as well. You are a good mother. I said, causing Gaia to flinch slightly. She gave off a sad smile. Oi, are you all just going to act like I'm never there? The girl protested. I ignored her. Don't ignore me. You know you want this. She gave me a sultry look as she moved her hands on her body. So what's the story with her? Gaia asked amused. I ordered pizza. And then she came. I deadpanned. Long story short, turns out it wasn't a pizza place, just a sex site or whatever. I sighed, causing Gaia to snort. I glare at her. Don't even think about laughing. I know how you are around food. Gaia snickered. How can you make such an idiotic mistake? Even Frigga could not help but giggle at this. It was an honest mistake. I sighed. I was doing something really important, and I was really hungry, and I wasn't looking at what I was doing. Yeah, sure. Gaia smirked coyly. Whatever you say, dear. I rolled my eyes. So, since this is a family meeting, and you are all, technically family, you can come in, but try not to cause conflict. I trust you too. Based upon what I have seen of Frigga, I thought, and the stories told by Thor, I opened the door and gestured for them to come in. That in which they did. First Frigga, and then Gaia. I heard the sound of mother. From Thor, I could hear the noise as he stood up from his seat. The girl tried to come in, but I blocked her. Oh, come on, she growled, please. She gave me a puppy-eyed stare. I gave her a deadpanned look, and shut the door. I looked back at the family and saw that everyone was downstairs now. Blonsky was still unconscious. Gohan, Trina, Zelera, and Jine were looking at Gaia and Frigga with surprised looks. None more so than Thor and Sif, who bowed to her. Thor walked right up to Frigga and gave her a bone-crushing hug, who looked very surprised. Also what caught her attention was Hela, who was staring at her with a stoic, indifferent look. Frigga shuddered slightly, but managed to give her a small smile in greeting. Hela didn't react, she just stared at her. Oh, look who decided to show up. Jine deadpanned at Gaia, looking like her father. We thought you'd abandoned us. Gaia looked down. I am sorry. As I told your father, I had some relationships to fix. She looked down at Gohan and gave him a thankful smile. You helped as well, and I appreciate it. Gohan nodded. I had some ideas, he smiled. I am happy for you, Aunt Gaia. I am so proud of you, Thor. Frigga said with a soft smile. You are truly worthy of becoming king now. I have much to learn, mother. Thor laughed, however. Once I do, I will be sure to become the king Asgard deserves. He whispered into her ear, also, you must have known all about Hela, my sister, and I forgive you for keeping it from me. Frigga's eyes widened. You forgive? But, I thought. A lone tear slowly fell to her cheeks. Never mind. Thank you, son. You really have grown. I watched with a smile as Hela slowly walked over to me. This was an unexpected turn. She said, showing no reaction, yes. I smiled, as Gaia watched on with sadness, from behind. Yes, it was. I smiled looking at Gaia, but it's good that she is growing. I am proud of my mentor. Hela nodded, as she continued to stare at them with no reaction, but I saw a small, unnoticeable one. The corner of her lips twitched upwards, ever so slightly. Chapter 79. Family Meeting 2. The atmosphere was tense. Well, to Frigga and Gaia. Frigga eyed Hela nervously as she stared at Frigga intently before she started to eat her food casually. Frigga swallowed. Oh dear. Frigga muttered, I wanted to thank you for what you have done for my son. Hela raised an eyebrow. It was nothing. All he needed was a beating. Hela went back to eating, as Thor chuckled. Indeed, I was beaten. My sister was even proven worthy of the hammer. Frigga noticed that he wasn't using the term, my hammer anymore. This was a little shocking to her, since as long as she had known the I see. If she was proven worthy, then I suppose that would do. She glanced at me, before nodding appreciatively at me. I thank you for everything as well, for what you have done. You have changed the hearts of everyone here. I shrugged. It's what I do. Now are you going to eat? Your food is going to get cold. Oh man, it smells so good. Jine moaned as she sniffed the air. Blonsky awoken to the smell of something delicious. As he looked on, he saw the people he fought with, including the girl he admits was stronger than he was. She must be some sort of mutant or something, inherited by her mother, who even he has to admit is one hell of a woman. To be stronger than him in his beast mode state. That is something. He stared at them for a long moment, his stomach urging him to go to the table and devour the food. He just stared silently, with a blank expression. Unfortunately, his stomach decided to betray him, and it let loose a roar that shook the entire house. As expected, nobody cared. Hey, whoever you are. The admittedly attractive woman also said, "From what he has heard so far, that woman seemed to be the mother of the famous Andrew Parker. It still bothers him that a person so rich and famous would live in such a house as this." "Do you want something to eat?" "I'm not hungry," he replied, but his stomach once again betrayed him, letting out a small roar. Blonsky fought the urge to growl. "Your belly betrayed you," May stated with a small smile. "Come on, join us. We wouldn't just let a person starve to death." "Grandma, what are you doing?" Jai narrowed her eyes at her. "You do realize what he did, right? Relax, we can take care of ourselves." May smiled, "And if we can't, we have you and the rest of the family to fight for us." "Let him eat." "Can I eat too?" A voice from the door asked. "I am really hungry." "How about you go to your house and eat, you dash." "Jine, sweetie," May said, cutting her off. "Let her in too." Everyone turned to May with a shocked look. "Thank you." Jine looked at her with a shocked look. "Oh, what, Grandma?" Dash. "It was Andrew's fault, dear." May deadpanned to Jine. "He suffers the consequences. Besides, do you honestly think that girl is the only fangirl who wants to get into his pants?" She looked at Frigga, whose eyes were lingering on Andrew's muscles a bit longer. She had a small blush on her cheeks. The moment Frigga's and May's eyes locked, Frigga's eyes widened. "I beg your pardon?" "The girl came in and tried to get close to me, but Zellara grabbed her and halted her. She struggled to get free but wouldn't break free. She was far too weak." Zellara stared at the girl flatly, an expression that resembled her father. The girl pouted and sat down. Hela smirked. She honestly wasn't angry. Her husband had proven himself his devotion to her, rejecting women far more beautiful than Thor's mother without hesitation. However, the reason why she was so amused was that she was the wife of her father Odin. So, I think you can paint the picture of what Hela was getting at, though she would never allow it. I was hers, and only hers. Odin's pissed-off look amused her. Gaia smirked. "Oh my, isn't this an interesting development? Frigga, Queen of Asgard, has a crush on Andrew?" "I do not." Frigga denied instantly, the blush on her cheeks growing. "I love the All-Father Odin and only Odin. It's just, I have never seen anyone with such developed muscle that didn't look disgusting. Even the All-Father in his prime didn't look dash." I raised my eyebrow at her, causing her to shut up and blush heavier. Hela's smirk grew, and the mental look of Odin's pissed-off expression was getting more and more enjoyable. Chapter 80. Let's play A. "I don't think I expected this when I came with you to this meeting." Peter deadpanned. "You'll get used to it," Zellara said flatly, causing me to chuckle. "You know what? Why don't we play a game?" My mother said. "Yeah, oh hell yeah, I love you, Mom." The girl grinned. No. "You stay the hell away from my family," I said with a deadpanned expression. The girl gave me a half-lidded expression. "Grandma, what the hell?" Jine asked, only to be slapped upside the head. "Language," my mother said as Jine clutched her head. May I ask why you are allowing her in?" My father asked with a raised eyebrow. "It is obvious she is going to be keen on getting into our son's pants." "Like she will actually try." May scoffed. "Hela would most likely kill her before she gets a chance." The girl paled. She completely forgot about her. She knew of Hela, the woman who was Andrew's wife, seen on TV with him when he walked across the red carpet with her, but she also knew she wasn't afraid to beat the shit out of anybody who irritates her. That includes guys that try to get with her in front of Andrew. However, as she glanced at Hela, "But she you wouldn't kill me, would you?" she asked hesitantly. Hela's lips twisted into a cold, deadly smirk in response. The girl gulped. I think I will head out now." The girl muttered before she grabbed her stuff and bolted out the door. Once the door bolted, everyone stared either at the girl or Hela, with a mix of amusement, shock, and disapproval. My wife a small wry grin and shrugged in response to her smirk, turning smug. Frigga looked on in slight disapproval. However, she couldn't do this, but she could see the chemistry in the family and the bond that they shared. She envied the bond that they had, and wished her own family had the same one. She sent me a longing look, wishing her own husband could be like him, and her own sons could be like her. And maybe, Hela, they could also connect as well, if she'd let her. Blonsky looked around. He was bored out of his mind, but he was slightly amused in how chaotic this family had become just because of one idiot girl. He had nothing to do honestly, and perhaps he could actually gain their trust, so he can learn from them and grow, and then kill them when he gets the chance. Unknown to him, none of them planned to teach them ki. The training that I had planned would be different. I was not dumb enough to actually teach techniques to an enemy. What game do you want us to play, Aunt May? Peter asked curiously. You don't mean video games, do you? May rolled her eyes and got up before she pulled out a game. Never have I ever. She explained, this is a game that will get us to know who you are. Starting with never have I ever, and all of those who answered will take a sip of cider, since none of us drink alcohol. Nor do we need to. Jine snorted, I'm game. This could actually be fun. Gohan admitted, I'll try as well. I'm in. Tina smirked with Zelera nodding in agreement, same. Thor grew thoughtful for a moment. We had no such games in Asgard, but this should be interesting. Frigga slowly nodded in agreement, with Sif who smirked. Hela shrugged her shoulders. Peter said sure, while Ben nodded, I'm fine with that. My father said. All turned to Blonsky, who was slightly amused and slightly irritated at the same time, before he rolled his eyes. Whatever, get on with it. May smiled. Chapter 81. Game. Never have I ever. 1. I will be right back. May said with a small grin as she got up and went away. A few seconds later she came back with drinks. Now not to worry, I had laced the drinks with magic, so now, whenever you lie you'll feel a little jolt of pain down your spine. Blonsky scoffed. Magic does not exist. We ignored him. So let's get started. Since I proposed the game, I think it is fair for me to go first. May said with a small grin. I raised my eyebrow at her. Never have I ever. She hummed for a moment. Got to think of a good one. Never have I ever cheated on my spouse. No one took a drink. No one but Blonsky, which was not really surprising to us, to be honest. Well, we are young, so that one was obvious. Jine snorted. I mean, besides the fact that I have had kids my age trying to get with me. Zelera and Tina nodded. Same? Why are you not surprised? Blonsky asked curiously and slight annoyance. Well, to put it nicely, Gohan said slowly. You look like an asshole. Who would ditch your girl with some whore on the streets? Zelera replied flatly. Long-gauge young lady. May scolded. All right, now that everyone has drunk, who wants to go next? May asked, how about you, son? She turned to me. I shrugged and thought of something. Before shrugging, never have I ever. Not seen a supernatural creature, only seen in myths. Blonsky was about to say they aren't real, but Hela, Thor, Sif, Frigga, Gaia, Hela, and I are the only ones who did not drink. You have got to be kidding me. Blonsky deadpanned. Asgard is full of mythical beasts, and some are frightening. Thor said with a grin while Frigga nodded. I nodded as well. I myself had come across a siren during my travels in the ocean with my family when I was a kid. May and Ben nodded. Let's not forget the demons we had fought against with the Sorcerer Supreme, dear. May said with a grin. I nodded, smiling at the memory. It was one of my first battles that got my Saiyan blood pumping. Wait, you met a siren father? Tina asked curiously. I nodded. Oh yes, I did indeed meet a siren. However, this was not like the Little Mermaid movie, this was more like, let's just say different. And she tried to grab me and pulled me under but was too weak. I explained. As a matter of fact, it took a couple of sirens to try to drag me down, but even then it wasn't enough. They were humiliated, to say the least. I said with a small smirk. May and Ben chuckled, remembering the scene vividly. It brought back memories, the expressions. As to be expected, my husband is not like the typical mortals. It's unsurprising that they learned their place. Hela said with a small snort. I, for one, like my little brother had said, had encountered beasts that seemed mythical to Midgardians, some hostile but others friendly. I have a pet back in my prison that I would go back to after I finish with business with my father. Frigga looked at Hela in concern, but Thor put a hand on her shoulders. Gaia nodded. Sirens are my children as well, however, they are not as evil as one may think. They were once pure, however, humanity's cruelty had caused their hearts to become cold, and then as time grew, they became like beasts or monsters. Gaia explained. I nodded slowly. I kind of figured. I replied. Chapter 82. Previously, I will be right back. May said with a small grin as she got up and went away. A few seconds later she came back with drinks. Now not to worry, I had laced the drinks with magic, so now, whenever you lie you'll feel a little jolt of pain down your spine. Blonsky scoffed. Magic does not exist. We ignored him. So let's get started. Since I proposed the game, I think it is fair for me to go first. May said with a small grin. I raised my eyebrow at her. Never have I ever. She hummed for a moment. Got to think of a good one. Never have I ever cheated on my spouse. No one took a drink. No one but Blonsky, which was not really surprising to us, to be honest. Well, we are young, so that one was obvious. Jine snorted. I mean, besides the fact that I have had kids my age trying to get with me. Zelera and Tina nodded. Same? Why are you not surprised? Blonsky asked curiously and slight annoyance. Well, to put it nicely, Gohan said slowly. You look like an asshole. Who would ditch your girl with some whore on the streets? Zelera replied flatly. Long gauge young lady. May scolded. All right, now that everyone has drunk, who wants to go next? May asked, how about you, son? She turned to me. I shrugged and thought of something. Before shrugging, never have I ever not seen a supernatural creature only seen in myths. Blonsky was about to say they aren't real, but Hela, Thor, Sif, Frigga, Gaia, Hela, and I are the only ones who did not drink. You have got to be kidding me. Blonsky deadpanned. Asgard is full of mythical beasts, and some are frightening. Thor said with a grin while Frigga nodded. I nodded as well. I myself had come across a siren during my travels in the ocean with my family when I was a kid. May and Ben nodded. Let's not forget the demons we had fought against with the Sorcerer Supreme, dear. May said with a grin. I nodded, smiling at the memory. It was one of my first battles that got my Saiyan blood pumping. Wait, you met a siren father? Tina asked curiously. I nodded. Oh yes, I did indeed meet a siren. However, this was not like the Little Mermaid movie, this was more like, let's just say, different. And she tried to grab me and pulled me under but was too weak. I explained. As a matter of fact, it took a couple of sirens to try to drag me down, but even then it wasn't enough. They were humiliated, to say the least. I said with a small smirk. May and Ben chuckled, remembering the scene vividly. It brought back memories, the expressions. As to be expected, my husband is not like the typical mortals. It's unsurprising that they learned their place. Hela said with a small snort. I, for one, like my little brother had said, had encountered beasts that seemed mythical to Midgardians, some hostile but others friendly. I have a pet back in my prison that I would go back to after I finish with business with my father. Frigga looked at Hela in concern, but Thor put a hand on her shoulders. Gaia nodded. Sirens are my children as well, however, they are not as evil as one may think. They were once pure, however, humanity's cruelty had caused their hearts to become cold, and then as time grew, they became like beasts or monsters. Gaia explained. I nodded slowly. Kind of figured. I said as I gazed at the sky. Theory's rest of the game went by fast. Those that were Accord, Frigga and Blonsky. Blonsky didn't care. Frigga didn't feel like she belonged there. But she figured at least for Thor's sake, she would be there. As quick as it was over. Frigga walked outside but was hoisted by Thor. You are going to leave. Thor said. Why not stay on Midgard for longer? I do not think it is wise. Frigga said softly. My path differs from here, my child. Asgard is where my heart lies. Leaning against the wall of the house, Hela was watching the entire thing stoically. She didn't say a word, just had a look of complete indifference on her face. Frigga glanced up at them for once before glancing back at Thor. She smiled softly. You are always welcome here. My voice came from behind her. Frigga was actually startled as she snapped her neck back to face me. She stammered slightly, before she gathered back her thoughts. Hela gave me a hard look which I ignored. All appreciated, Kakarot. But Hela? We will talk. I said softly, but you had nothing to do with the situation. Because you are Odin's wife. Frigga nodded slowly as she glanced to where Hela was, her piercing gaze boring a hole through Frigga's skull. I understand, she smiled hesitantly, before looking up to the sky. Doll. As soon as she said that, a bright beam of multicolored light shot down from the skies to envelop her.